The fluorescent lights of Mercy Ridge General flickered at 11:47 p.m. when the gunshot victim crashed through the doors, and while Dr. Adrian Kelso screamed orders at his team, the quiet nurse in the corner, the one they called the ghost, the one who scrubbed floors and said nothing, stood motionless with her fingers pressed against her watch, counting something. Her jaw was set like iron. Her eyes tracked the patient's vitals with a precision that didn't belong in a woman they'd spent 6 months humiliating. Outside, thunder cracked over Riverside Falls, and 300 miles away, a Black Hawk helicopter was already lifting off a restricted military base, rotors screaming into the storm. Nobody in that emergency room knew what was coming, but she did. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you something. Stay with me until the very end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far these words can travel. The emergency department at Mercy Ridge General Hospital operated on a hierarchy as rigid as any military structure, and at the very bottom of that chain stood Evelyn Harper. She moved through the halls like vapor, her scrubs always clean, her hair always tied back in a regulation bun, her face always neutral. The other nurses barely noticed her. The doctors didn't bother learning her name. To them, she was simply the float, the warm body administration sent to fill gaps in the schedule, the one who took the worst shifts without complaint, the one who cleaned up after everyone else's mistakes. 6 months she'd been there. 6 months of invisible labor. Dr. Adrian Kelso, by contrast, was very visible. He strode through Mercy Ridge's emergency department like a conquering general, his white coat pristine, his reputation gleaming. Harvard Medical School. Published research. A surgical precision that had saved dozens of lives. The hospital's marketing department featured his face on billboards across Riverside Falls. Patients requested him by name. The board of directors smiled when he walked into meetings. He was untouchable. Evelyn's first real interaction with him came during her second week. A patient had been admitted with what seemed like a simple case of gastroenteritis. Vomiting, dehydration, elevated heart rate. Standard protocol. Kelso ordered fluids and anti-nausea medication, ready to move on to the next case. Evelyn had glanced at the monitor. Something in the rhythm wasn't right. The intervals were just slightly irregular, a pattern she'd seen before in a very different context. "Doctor," she'd said quietly, "I think we should run an EKG. The tachycardia might be—" Kelso had turned to her with an expression of pure condescension. "You think?" He'd let the words hang in the air. "You're a nurse. I'm the physician. I think. You do what you're told." The other nurses had looked away. Nobody wanted to draw his fire. Evelyn had nodded once and stepped back, but she'd also quietly pulled a resident aside 15 minutes later and suggested the EKG. When it came back showing early signs of myocardial infarction, Kelso had taken full credit for the catch, never once acknowledging the nurse who'd actually spotted it. That became the pattern. Evelyn would notice things, subtle changes in breathing, slight discrepancies in lab values, the way a patient's eyes didn't quite track normally, and she would speak up once, just once. If she was dismissed, she found other ways. She'd mention concerns to residents. She'd double-check orders. She'd position herself near patients she was worried about, ready to intervene. The second things went south. She saved 3 lives in her first month that way. Nobody knew except the patients who walked out alive. The humiliation, meanwhile, only escalated. Kelso seemed to take a particular pleasure in cutting her down. When she prepared a suture tray and placed the instruments in an unconventional but more efficient arrangement, he'd swept them onto the floor. "Do it right," he'd said, forcing her to rebuild the tray while he watched. When she'd quietly suggested a different approach to a difficult IV placement, he'd banned her from performing the procedure entirely. "Stick to bedpans," he told her in front of a room full of staff. The other nurses had their own ways of establishing hierarchy. Jennifer Moss, the senior ER nurse, assigned Evelyn every unpleasant task: cleaning contaminated rooms, disposing of biological waste, dealing with belligerent patients at 3 in the morning. Character building, Jennifer called it with a smile that never reached her eyes. Evelyn did it all without complaint. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing. She organized supply closets that were already organized. She took verbal abuse from patients and staff alike with the same calm, neutral expression. "Why do you let them treat you like that?" A young resident named Tom Chen asked her one night after Kelso had publicly berated her for a charting error she hadn't made. Evelyn had looked at him with those calm, unreadable eyes. "Because the work matters more than the ego." Tom hadn't understood. Nobody did. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Evelyn Harper had spent 12 years in combat zones where ego got people killed. She'd learned to absorb disrespect the same way she'd learned to stabilize a sucking chest wound or calculate morphine dosages while mortar rounds fell around her. It was just another skill, another form of discipline. The night everything changed started like any other night shift. Evelyn arrived at 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes early as always. She changed into her scrubs in the staff locker room, ignoring the conversation happening behind her about weekend plans and dating disasters. She tied her hair back with practiced efficiency, checking her reflection not out of vanity, but out of habit, making sure nothing was out of place, nothing that would draw attention. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. She glanced at it briefly. A text from a number with no name attached. Status check. She typed back a single word, green. The phone went back into her locker. She headed to the nurse's station. Jennifer Moss was already there, reviewing the patient board with a cup of coffee that smelled expensive. She glanced up when Evelyn approached. "You're on trauma tonight. We're short-staffed in the bay." "Understood." "And Harper?" Jennifer's voice carried that particular edge it always did when addressing her. "Try to stay out of Dr. Kelso's way. He's in a mood." Evelyn nodded and moved toward the trauma bay. Through the glass walls, she could see Kelso reviewing scans with two residents, gesturing emphatically at something on the screen. His voice carried even through the closed door, confident, authoritative, absolute. The first few hours passed in the usual rhythm of emergency medicine. A car accident victim with minor injuries. An elderly woman with chest pain that turned out to be severe acid reflux. A construction worker with a nail through his hand who kept insisting he was fine while clearly going into shock. Evelyn moved between patients with quiet efficiency, anticipating needs before they were voiced, correcting small errors before they became large ones. She was restocking a crash cart when she felt it, that subtle shift in the air that came before chaos. The ambulance bay doors exploded inward at 11:47 p.m. "Gunshot wound!" The paramedic's voice cut through the normal emergency room noise like a blade. 26-year-old male, single GSW to the upper right quadrant. Estimated blood loss 1,500 cubic centimeters, BP dropping, GCS 13, and falling. The trauma team mobilized instantly. Kelso appeared from nowhere, snapping on gloves as he strode toward Trauma 1. "Get him on the table! I want 2 large-bore IVs, O-negative blood, and someone-page surgery now." The patient was a young man, his shirt soaked crimson, his face the color of old paper. 2 paramedics transferred him to the trauma table with practiced efficiency. Monitors began shrieking immediately. Blood pressure 80/50 and dropping, heart rate 140 and climbing. Evelyn moved to the edge of the room, positioning herself where she could see everything. Her eyes tracked the patient with an intensity that had nothing to do with normal nursing assessment. Kelso was cutting away the shirt, exposing the entry wound high on the right side. "Liver shot," he announced. "Possibly nicked the hepatic artery. Get me a chest x-ray and call the OR. We're going up in 5 minutes." The team moved like a machine around him. IVs went in. Blood started flowing. The x-ray tech positioned the portable machine. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the patient's left leg. It was positioned at a slightly unusual angle. The jeans showed no obvious injury, but there was something about the way the fabric bunched near the thigh. A darkness that could have been shadow or could have been something else entirely. "Doctor," she said quietly. "His left leg." "Not now." Kelso didn't even look up. "We've got an active abdominal bleed. Focus on what matters." Evelyn's jaw tightened fractionally. She took one step closer. "The femoral might be compromised. The positioning suggests—" "I said not now." Kelso's voice cracked like a whip. "You want to help? Get more blood from the bank. That's what nurses do. They fetch things." The other nurses in the room exchanged glances. Tom Chen, the resident, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Nobody contradicted Kelso. Nobody ever did. Evelyn stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then she moved. But she didn't move toward the blood bank. She moved toward the patient's left side. "Harper!" Jennifer's voice was sharp. "You heard Dr. Kelso. Blood bank. Now!" Evelyn ignored her. Her hands went to the patient's jeans, finding the button. "What the hell are you doing?" Kelso's head snapped up. "Get away from my patient!" Evelyn's fingers were already working, unfastening, pulling the fabric down to expose the thigh. For a moment, there was nothing visible. Then she pressed gently on the tissue just above the knee, and a fountain of arterial blood erupted from a wound nobody had seen. The monitors went insane. Blood pressure crashed to 60/40. The patient's eyes rolled back. "Jesus Christ!" Tom dove for the leg, his hands immediately going to apply pressure, but the blood was pumping between his fingers in rhythmic spurts that matched the patient's failing heartbeat. Evelyn was already moving. Her hand shot out to the instrument tray, grabbing a hemostat with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She dropped to her knees beside the leg, her fingers finding the wound by touch, diving into tissue with absolute confidence. "What are you—" Kelso started, but Evelyn had already clamped the femoral artery, her movement so fast and sure that the bleeding stopped almost instantly. The room went silent, except for the monitors. The blood pressure began to stabilize, crawling back up toward survivable numbers. Evelyn held the clamp steady, her face completely calm. "He needs surgery," she said quietly. "Both injuries. Now." Kelso stared at her like she'd just materialized from thin air. His face cycled through shock, confusion, and then something darker. "You just performed a medical procedure without authorization. You violated every protocol we have." "I stopped him from dying." Evelyn's voice remained level. "You missed a severed femoral artery because you were too busy being right." "Get security up here." Kelso's voice was ice. "I want this nurse removed from my emergency department, immediately." Jennifer was already reaching for the phone. Tom looked between Evelyn and Kelso, his face pale. "Dr. Kelso, she saved his life. If she hadn't, she overstepped her authority." Kelso's voice rose to a shout. "I don't care if she thinks she saved him. She's a nurse. She follows orders. She doesn't make medical decisions." 2 security guards appeared at the door within minutes. Evelyn released the hemostat carefully, allowing Tom to take over holding pressure. She stood up, her scrubs now decorated with the patient's blood, and faced the guards without resistance. "We need to escort you out," one of them said apologetically. He was young, clearly uncomfortable with the assignment. "I understand." Evelyn pulled off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. As the guards led her toward the door, Kelso called out, "You're done in this hospital, Harper. I'm filing a complaint with the board and the state nursing board. You'll be lucky if you can get a job changing bedpans at a nursing home after I'm through." Evelyn paused at the doorway. She turned back to look at him, and for just a moment, something flickered in those calm eyes, something that made Kelso take an involuntary step backward. "The patient's name is Marcus Webb," she said quietly. "He's 26 years old. He has a daughter who's 3. He coaches Little League on weekends, and he's going to walk out of this hospital alive because I did my job." She paused. "I hope you remember that when you're explaining to the board why you missed a severed artery." Then she was gone, walking between the guards with her head high and her shoulders straight. The disciplinary hearing took place in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor exactly 4 hours later. Evelyn sat on one side of the table in clean scrubs they'd allowed her to change into. Across from her sat Hospital Administrator Patricia Rourke, Chief of Staff Dr. Marilyn Voss, and Dr. Adrian Kelso, who looked like a man who'd just won a significant victory. Jennifer Moss sat off to the side, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Harper," Patricia Rourke began, "you've been accused of serious professional misconduct, specifically performing medical procedures outside your scope of practice, insubordination, and endangering a patient." "The patient is alive," Evelyn said calmly. "His vitals are stable. He's in surgery now for repair of both the hepatic and femoral injuries, expected full recovery." "That's not the point." Dr. Voss leaned forward. "You can't just take matters into your own hands because you disagree with a physician's judgment. There's a chain of command for a reason." "The chain of command was about to kill someone." Kelso's fist hit the table. You had no way of knowing that wound was there. You got lucky with a guess, and you're trying to turn that into some kind of heroic intervention. Evelyn turned her calm gaze on him. I've been working in emergency medicine for 15 years. 12 of those were in combat zones. I've seen more trauma cases than you've performed surgeries. I knew that wound was there because I know how to assess a patient properly. Combat zones? Patricia's eyebrows rose. Your resume says you've been working civilian hospitals for the past several years. That's correct. Where exactly were you before that? Evelyn met her gaze steadily. I'm not at liberty to discuss my complete employment history. Some of my previous work is classified. Jennifer let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Classified. Right. Is that what we're calling it when we get fired and don't want to explain why? Ms. Harper, Dr. Voss said, we take these allegations very seriously. Without proper documentation of your claimed experience, and given the severity of tonight's breach of protocol, we have no choice but to place you on immediate suspension pending further investigation. And by suspension, you mean termination. Evelyn's voice remained flat. Patricia had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Your employment status will be reviewed. In the meantime, you're barred from the hospital premises. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Kelso leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, satisfaction written across his face. Maybe this will teach you that there are consequences for thinking you know better than your superiors. Evelyn stood. She looked at each person in the room in turn, her expression unreadable. Are we finished? One more thing. Patricia pulled out a form. We'll need your hospital badge and any access cards. Evelyn reached into her pocket and placed her badge on the table. The photo showed her with the same neutral expression she wore now. Anything else? That's all. Security will take you to your locker. The same two guards from earlier waited outside the conference room. They walked her back down to the staff area in silence. The night shift was in full swing now. Nurses moving with purpose, monitors beeping, the constant low-level chaos that defined emergency medicine. Several staff members watched as she passed. Nobody said anything. Nobody met her eyes. In the locker room, Evelyn opened her locker and pulled out her backpack. There wasn't much, a change of clothes, a book, her phone. She'd never been one to personalize her workspace. No photos, no decorations, nothing that would indicate who she really was. Her phone vibrated again as she was zipping up the backpack. Another text from the unknown number. Situation report? She typed back, compromised, departing facility. The response came immediately. Stand by, possible activation. Evelyn's finger hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then she typed, understood. She closed the locker for the last time and turned to the guards. I'm ready. They escorted her through the emergency department toward the main entrance. She could feel eyes on her, curious, judgmental, indifferent. The hospital that had never truly seen her was now watching her leave. They were halfway across the ER when the television in the waiting room suddenly got louder. Someone had turned up the volume. A news anchor's voice cut through the normal noise. Breaking news from downtown Riverside Falls, where authorities are responding to what's being described as a hazardous materials incident. Multiple casualties are being reported, and emergency services are asking residents in the downtown area to shelter in place. We're getting reports that some kind of chemical agent may be involved. Evelyn stopped walking. Her entire body went rigid. One of the guards touched her elbow. Ma'am, we need to keep moving. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the screen, where shaky cell phone footage showed people in downtown Riverside Falls stumbling out of buildings, faces covered, coughing. First responders in standard hazmat gear were trying to establish a perimeter, but even from the footage, Evelyn could see they were using the wrong protocols. They thought it was an industrial accident. She knew better. The news camera panned across the scene, and there, just for a moment, she saw a figure in military-style tactical gear, partially obscured by smoke. The gear was wrong for local police. Wrong for FBI. The person moved with a specific kind of precision, a combat awareness that Evelyn recognized instantly. Her hand went to her phone. It was already vibrating. She pulled it out to see not a text, but a direct call from the unknown number. Harper, she answered, her voice suddenly different, sharper, more authoritative. Chief Cross. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, urgent. We have a situation. Downtown exposure, chemical agent, profile matches your Syria brief from 2019. We've got 1 medic down and 6 civilians critical. Local hospitals aren't equipped. Evelyn's eyes closed for a fraction of a second. When they opened, they were completely focused. What's the agent? We're still confirming, but preliminary indicates modified VX variant. You wrote the counter protocol. I need access to a level 4 facility and negative. We need you mobile. The antidote is synthesized, but we need someone who knows the administration protocol. You're the only person within 300 miles certified for this. I'm currently being escorted off hospital premises. Not anymore. The voice paused. We're 60 seconds out. Rooftop, presidential override is already in effect. Evelyn looked at the 2 security guards who were watching her with growing confusion. She looked at the emergency department behind her, where Dr. Adrian Kelso had just emerged from Trauma 1, where nurses moved through their routines, where patients waited to be seen. Understood, she said into the phone. I'm moving to extraction point. She ended the call and turned to the guards. I need to get to the roof, now. The older guard shook his head. Ma'am, we have our orders. We're supposed to escort you out of the building. Your orders just changed. Evelyn's voice carried a command that made both guards straighten unconsciously. In approximately 45 seconds, a military helicopter is going to land on this hospital's roof. I need to be on it. That's not... The younger guard started. The building's fire alarm suddenly blared to life. But it wasn't the normal alarm. It was the emergency alert system, the one that only activated for disasters. A computerized voice began speaking. Attention! This facility is now under federal emergency protocol. All staff maintain current positions. Rooftop access is restricted to authorized personnel only. Kelso appeared in the hallway, his face flushed with anger. What the hell is going on? Harper, you need to leave immediately before I have you arrested for... The sound of helicopter rotors cut through everything else. It wasn't the distant thump of a medical helicopter. This was deeper, more powerful, the signature sound of military-grade aircraft. Everyone in the emergency department turned toward the windows. Through the glass, they could see it descending. A Black Hawk helicopter, matte black, no markings visible, dropping toward the hospital roof with the kind of precision that spoke of pilots who'd landed in far more hostile locations. Evelyn was already moving toward the stairwell that led to the roof. The guards followed, no longer trying to stop her, but clearly confused about whether they should be helping or hindering. Kelso ran after them. You can't just commandeer hospital property. Someone explain what's happening. Evelyn hit the stairwell door at a run, taking the steps 2 at a time. Behind her, she could hear Kelso shouting, his voice echoing in the enclosed space, but his words were already meaningless background noise. She burst through the roof access door at a sprint. The helicopter was touching down, its rotors creating a downdraft that nearly knocked her backward. The side door slid open, and 3 figures emerged, not medical personnel, but operators in full tactical gear, faces obscured by night vision equipment flipped up on their helmets. The lead operator, a compact woman with lieutenant's bars barely visible on her vest, snapped to attention the moment she saw Evelyn. Chief Cross! Her voice cut through the rotor noise. We have 6 critical exposures and 1 medic down. Agent is confirmed modified VX with accelerated neurological onset. Local ERs are trying standard atropine protocols, but it's not touching it. Evelyn was already climbing into the helicopter. What's the exposure timeline? First contact 90 minutes ago. Symptoms manifested at 45 minutes. We've got maybe 20 minutes before permanent neurological damage. Behind them, Kelso and the security guards exploded onto the roof. Kelso's face was a mask of shock and fury. You can't take her. She's been suspended. She's under investigation for... The lieutenant turned to face him, and something in her posture made Kelso stop talking immediately. Sir, this facility is now operating under federal emergency authority. This medical professional is being activated for a classified crisis response. You need to clear the roof immediately. Medical professional? Kelso's voice rose to a shout. She's a nurse! A suspended nurse! She has no authority to... Evelyn appeared in the helicopter's doorway. She'd already stripped off her outer scrubs and was pulling on tactical medical gear that one of the operators had handed her. Her movements were automatic, practiced, the muscle memory of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Dr. Kelso, she said, her voice carrying across the roof despite the helicopter noise. I need you to prepare Trauma 1 for incoming critical patients. Chemical exposure, modified nerve agent. Standard protocols won't work. I'll transmit specific treatment guidelines once we have the situation contained. You don't give me orders. Kelso's face was purple now. You're a subordinate. You're nobody. The lieutenant handed Evelyn a tactical headset. She put it on, adjusting the mic with automatic precision. Control, this is Chief Cross. I'm airborne. Have the affected patients been isolated? A voice crackled through the headset. Affirmative, contaminated zone is locked down. We've got local fire attempting decon, but they're using the wrong solution. Our medic went down trying to administer the antidote, exposure through compromised gear. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Medic's status? Critical. Maybe 10 minutes. I need a full chemical analysis transmitted to my device immediately, and someone notify Mercy Ridge General that they're about to become the designated treatment facility for this incident. On the roof, Kelso stood frozen, his brain clearly unable to process what he was seeing. The suspended nurse, the woman he'd just humiliated and terminated, was coordinating a federal emergency response from a military helicopter. Jennifer Moss had appeared on the roof as well, along with several other staff members drawn by the commotion. They stood in a cluster, staring. "Who are you?" Kelso finally managed to ask, his voice barely audible. Evelyn looked down at him from the helicopter, and for the first time in 6 months, she let him see who she really was. The calm, neutral mask was still there, but behind it now was something harder, something forged in places where mistakes meant body bags. "Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross," she said clearly, "Combat Medical Specialist, United States Navy, 12 years active service, 4 deployments, decorated combat medic, and the only person in this state certified in counter-chemical warfare protocols." She paused. "I'm the one you've been ordering around for 6 months. The helicopter began to lift off. Evelyn grabbed a safety strap as the aircraft rose, but she kept her eyes on Kelso's face, watching the realization crash over him like a wave. "Trauma 1, she called down as they ascended. "Get it ready. The patients I bring back will die without proper treatment, and right now, you're the only facility close enough to save them." Then the Blackhawk was climbing fast, banking hard toward downtown Riverside Falls, and the hospital roof disappeared below them. Evelyn turned away from the door, her mind already shifting into combat mode, processing the chemical data that was streaming to her tablet, calculating dosages and protocols, preparing for what came next. The city sprawled below them like a circuit board gone dark, patches of emergency lighting marking where the contamination zone had been sealed off. Evelyn pressed her face closer to the window, her trained eye picking out the details that told the real story. The hazmat teams clustered too close together, the decontamination stations set up with equipment designed for industrial spills rather than weaponized chemical agents, the ambulances staged at distances that would be useless if the wind shifted. "How many responders have gone in?" she asked into her headset, her voice cutting through the thrum of rotor blades. The pilot's response crackled back immediately. 12 firefighters, 6 paramedics, 3 cops. Half of them are showing symptoms now. The incident commander pulled everyone back 20 minutes ago when he realized standard gear wasn't cutting it. Evelyn's fingers flew across her tablet, pulling up atmospheric data, wind patterns, building schematics. "What's the source point?" "Ventilation system at the Riverside Convention Center. Some kind of device introduced the agent into the HVAC during a pharmaceutical conference. Over 300 people were in the building. Most got out when the symptoms started, but we've got approximately 40 still inside, either too sick to move or helping others." "The pharmaceutical conference." Evelyn's voice went flat. "That's not coincidence." The lieutenant who'd briefed her on the roof leaned forward. Her name tape read Martinez. "Intelligence thinks it might be a targeted attack. Half the people in that building were researchers working on military contracts. Chemical defense, specifically." Evelyn looked up from her tablet, her eyes hard. Someone just turned a defense conference into a live fire test of their own nerve agent, and they chose a variant I wrote the counter protocol for because they wanted to see if it could be beaten. She turned to Martinez. "This is personal. Someone knows exactly what they're doing." The helicopter banked hard, descending toward a makeshift landing zone in a parking structure 6 blocks from the contaminated zone. Emergency vehicles ringed the area, fire trucks, ambulances, command vehicles with satellite arrays, and several unmarked black SUVs that screamed federal response. They touched down hard. Evelyn was out before the skids fully settled, her tactical medical pack already secured across her shoulders. Martinez and her team fell in behind her, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this kind of thing in places where mistakes meant international incidents. A man in a contamination suit without the helmet was waiting for them. His face sheened with sweat despite the cool night air. Federal insignia marked him as Department of Defense, though his exact agency wasn't specified. Chief Cross, I'm Coordinator Hayes. We've got a situation that's degrading fast. Show me. Evelyn was already walking toward the command vehicle. Inside, banks of monitors showed feeds from drones circling the convention center. Thermal imaging revealed clusters of heat signatures, people still alive inside the building, though several weren't moving. A digital map overlay showed the suspected agent dispersal pattern based on the HVAC system. Your medic, Evelyn said without preamble. Where? Hayes pulled up a different camera view. It showed a figure in full hazmat gear collapsed in what looked like a service corridor. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb. He went in with the first response team, realized the standard antidote wasn't working, tried to administer the modified protocol from your Syria deployment. His suit failed. We think a tear in the glove. He got a direct exposure trying to help a civilian. Evelyn's face remained neutral, but her hand tightened fractionally on the edge of the console. How long has he been down? 17 minutes. Then he's got maybe 8 left before the neurological damage becomes permanent. She turned to Martinez. I need full MOPP4 gear, the specialized antidote from the secure medical kit, and a direct route to Webb's position. And I need it 90 seconds ago. Martinez was already moving, barking orders into her radio. Within 60 seconds, operators were hauling equipment from a secured container. Not standard hazmat suits, but military-grade chemical warfare protection. The kind that cost more than most people's cars and could withstand exposure to agents designed to kill through skin contact. Evelyn stripped down to her base layer without hesitation or modesty, her movements mechanical. The operators helping her suit up were professional, efficient, focused only on making sure every seal was perfect. She caught one of them, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, staring at the scars that marked her arms and torso. Not surgery scars, shrapnel scars, burn scars, the kind you got when bombs went off close enough to feel the heat. Eyes on your work, Jackson, Martinez snapped, and the young operator's attention jerked back to the suit seals. The antidote, Evelyn said, her voice slightly muffled as the suit's internal communication system activated. Talk me through what Webb tried to use. Hayes pulled up a digital file on a tablet. He had the base formulation from your original protocol, atropine compound with the pralidoxime enhancement and the neural blocker sequence, but the agent inside that building is modified. It's binding faster and breaking down slower. Webb's doses weren't strong enough. Evelyn studied the chemical analysis, her mind already running through modifications. They weaponized it, made it persistent. Standard exposure degrades in minutes, but this variant is staying active in tissue for hours. Her fingers moved across the tablet, adjusting ratios, recalculating dosages. I need these compounds mixed now, and I need twice what you think we'll need. If Webb got exposed, there are going to be civilians in similar or worse condition. A makeshift field laboratory had been set up in a refrigerated truck 20 yards away. Evelyn walked toward it, moving with the awkward gait the heavy suit imposed, and climbed inside. 2 medical technicians in their own protective gear were already measuring compounds with the kind of precision normally reserved for bomb disposal. Chief Cross? One of them looked up. His accent was slight but recognizable. Russian, probably second generation. His name tag identified him as Volkov. We have base compounds ready, but need your verification on the synthesis sequence. Evelyn moved to the workstation, her gloved hands surprisingly dexterous despite the thick material. She began combining compounds with practiced ease, narrating her actions for the recording devices she knew were monitoring everything. Atropine base, 300% normal dosage. Chimase, 300 yatsa. Pralidoxime chelation agent, modified with the sodium-potassium balance adjusted for extended neural protection, and the classified component, the GABA receptor modulator that prevents the cascade failure. Volkov watched her work with visible respect. You're going off the standard protocol. The standard protocol was written for an agent that degrades naturally. This one doesn't. If I don't compensate, the first dose might work, but the patients will relapse within hours as the agent continues binding. She loaded the modified antidote into auto-injectors, each one color-coded and marked with precise dosage information. How many critical exposures do we have confirmed? 6 civilians inside the building showing severe symptoms. Your medic. And we've got 3 first responders in decon who are starting to decline. Volkov's voice was grim. The window is closing fast. Evelyn secured the injectors in her suit's medical kit. Then we move now. She turned to Martinez, who was waiting at the truck's door. I need a fire team. 3 operators, all MOP 4 certified. We go in, we extract the critical cases, we administer treatment in the field, extraction to Mercy Ridge General for secondary care and monitoring. Martinez's expression behind her face shield was skeptical. Chief, that hospital just suspended you. They think you're a protocol-breaking nurse who got lucky. You really want to send patients there? They're the only level 1 trauma center within 20 minutes, and they're about to receive very specific instructions on how to keep these people alive. Evelyn's voice carried absolute certainty. Besides, Dr. Kelso is going to learn something important tonight about the difference between medical credentials and actual competence. Back at Mercy Ridge General Hospital, the emergency department had descended into controlled chaos. The federal emergency alert had locked down certain systems and restricted rooftop access, but nobody seemed to know exactly what was happening or why. The staff had gathered in clusters, trading rumors and wild speculation. Dr. Adrian Kelso stood in the center of Trauma 1, his phone pressed to his ear, his face cycling through various shades of red, as he tried to get someone, anyone, to explain what had just happened. The hospital administrator wasn't answering. The chief of staff had been pulled into an emergency meeting. Even hospital security couldn't give him a straight answer. This is insane, he muttered, ending yet another unanswered call. He turned to Jennifer Moss, who was hovering nearby with an expression that suggested she was equally confused and slightly alarmed. A military helicopter just landed on our roof and took a suspended nurse. Someone needs to explain this before I call every news outlet in the city. That Tom Chen, the resident who'd been in the trauma bay during Evelyn's intervention, was watching the news feed on the waiting room television. His face had gone pale. Dr. Kelso, you need to see this. The news was now showing aerial footage of downtown Riverside Falls. The contaminated zone was clearly visible, a several-block radius around the convention center that had been completely evacuated. Emergency vehicles ringed the perimeter. And now, new footage showed a military helicopter, the same Black Hawk that had taken Evelyn, landing on a parking structure near the command center. The news anchor's voice carried a barely controlled urgency. We're now getting confirmation from federal sources that this is not an industrial accident, but a potential terrorist attack involving a chemical weapon. The agent involved is described as highly toxic, and authorities say standard emergency protocols are ineffective. We're being told that specialized military medical personnel have been deployed to the scene. Kelso's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and saw a message from an unknown number. Prepare Trauma 1 for incoming chemical exposure patients. Modified VX variant. Standard treatment protocols will not work. Specialized instructions to follow. Chief Petty Officer Cross. He stared at the message for a full 10 seconds before his brain processed the signature. Chief Petty Officer Cross. The woman he'd just had suspended. The woman he'd been belittling and dismissing for 6 months. Sir? Tom's voice was quiet. What do we do? Kelso looked up at the television, where the news was now showing file footage of previous chemical weapons incidents. The reporter was explaining the effects of nerve agents, the way they attack the nervous system, the extremely narrow window for effective treatment. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct call from the number. He answered it, his hand not entirely steady. This is Dr. Kelso. Doctor. Evelyn's voice came through with the slight distortion of a tactical communication system. In approximately 40 minutes, I'm going to send you 6 to 9 critical patients who have been exposed to a weaponized nerve agent. They will arrive with field treatment already administered, but they'll need continuous monitoring and secondary care. I'm transmitting the full protocol to your system now. Every minute of delay increases mortality risk. You can't just, Kelso started, but she cut him off. I can, and I am. This isn't a request, doctor. This is a federal emergency response, and right now your hospital is the designated treatment facility. You can either prepare your trauma bay properly, or you can explain to the families why their loved ones died because you were too proud to follow instructions from someone you spent 6 months humiliating. Her voice was clinical, detached, but there was steel underneath. Your choice. You have 30 seconds to decide. Kelso felt every eye in the trauma bay on him. Tom, Jennifer, the other nurses and residents who'd gathered around. All of them had heard at least one side of the conversation. All of them were waiting to see what he would do. What do you need? He finally said, the words tasting like ashes. Check your system. I've sent a complete treatment protocol. Read it. Understand it. Prepare Trauma 1 and Trauma 2 with the specified equipment. Set up continuous cardiac and neural monitoring for 9 patients. Stock the specific pharmaceutical compounds I've listed. And doctor? She paused. When these patients arrive, you will follow my protocol exactly. No modifications, no second guessing, no ego. Because if you deviate from what I've outlined, people will die. Do you understand? I understand. Good. Cross out. The line went dead. Kelso lowered the phone slowly. Around him, the trauma bay was silent. He pulled up his email on his phone and found the message from Cross. The attached document was extraordinarily detailed. Chemical composition of the agent, mechanism of action, specific counteragents, and their administration sequences, monitoring protocols, complication management, follow-up care. It read like something from a military medical manual because that's exactly what it was. At the bottom of the document, in a separate section marked Author Credentials, was information that made Kelso's stomach drop. Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross, 12 years naval service, 4 combat deployments to active chemical weapons zones, author of 6 classified medical protocols for counter-chemical warfare, principal investigator for the DoD's Advanced Combat Medicine Research Program, recipient of the Navy's Cross for Extraordinary Heroism in Combat, awarded after she'd treated 43 casualties during a chemical weapons attack in Syria while under active fire, refusing evacuation until every patient was stabilized. The woman he'd been calling the Shadow, the woman he'd told to stick to bedpans. Tom, he said quietly, start getting Trauma 1 ready. Everything on this list. Jennifer, I need you to pull the medications and compounds specified in the protocol. Move fast. The trauma bay exploded into organized motion. Staff pulled equipment, stocked medications, set up monitoring systems. Kelso read through the protocol 3 times, his medical training recognizing the brilliance of what Cross had designed. This wasn't standard emergency medicine. This was combat medicine adapted for civilian application, ruthlessly efficient, assuming limited resources and maximum stakes. 6 blocks away, Evelyn Cross was moving through the convention center's service corridors with Martinez's fire team spread around her in tactical formation. The building was a nightmare. Fluorescent lights flickering, emergency alarms screaming, and the faint but unmistakable chemical smell that penetrated even through the suit's filtration system. They'd found 3 civilians so far, all in advanced stages of exposure. Evelyn had administered the modified antidote with swift precision, watching for the telltale signs of reversal, pupil dilation normalizing, respiratory rate stabilizing, muscle rigidity releasing. Each one responded within 90 seconds, confirming her modified protocol was working. Webb should be through this corridor and down 1 level, Martinez said, checking her tactical display. But Chief, we've got a problem. Thermal's showing 4 more heat signatures clustered in the same area. They're not moving. Evelyn processed that information instantly. Webb stayed with them. He was trying to treat multiple casualties when his suit failed. She increased her pace, moving as fast as the bulky suit allowed. How's our air? 70 minutes remaining at current consumption. That's not enough if we have to carry multiple patients. Evelyn's mind was already calculating patient weight, distance to extraction, time required for treatment administration. Call in secondary extraction team. We're going to need help getting everyone out. They found Marcus Webb in what had been a conference room. He was on his back, his suit's helmet removed, a bad sign that meant he'd been desperate for air as his respiratory system began failing. Around him were 4 civilians in various states of collapse. One, a woman in her 50s, had clearly tried to help the others before succumbing herself. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside Webb, her gloved hands already going to his neck to check for a pulse. It was there, but thready, irregular, failing. His eyes were open but unfocused, pupils constricted to pinpoints. Classic severe nerve agent exposure. "How long?" Martinez asked quietly. "Minutes? Maybe less?" Evelyn was already pulling out the specialized auto-injectors. "But he's young, he's fit, and he got exposed trying to save lives. That counts for something." She administered the first injection directly into Webb's thigh, driving the needle through his suit and into the muscle. The dose was massive, triple what would normally be used, calculated for someone at the edge of fatal exposure. Then the second injection, the neural protector that would prevent the cascade of brain damage. Then the third, the chelating agent that would bind to the chemical and help his body clear it. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Webb's breathing continued its shallow, ineffective pattern. His pulse remained dangerously irregular. Then his chest hitched. Once. Twice. His breathing deepened fractionally. His pupils began to dilate, the constriction releasing. The pulse under Evelyn's fingers grew stronger, steadier. "Come on," she murmured, watching his vitals with absolute focus. "Come on, Marcus. You don't get to die in a conference room in Riverside Falls. That's not how your story ends." Webb's eyes focused. He blinked. His lips moved, trying to form words. "Don't talk," Evelyn said firmly. "Your respiratory system is still compromised. Just breathe. Let the treatment work." Martinez had already moved to the civilians, checking vitals, assessing exposure levels. "Chief, these 4 are bad. 2 are critical. The other 2 aren't far behind." "Then we treat them all, now." Evelyn moved to the nearest civilian, a man in his 40s, well-dressed, probably one of the pharmaceutical researchers. She administered the protocol quickly, efficiently, then moved to the next. Each injection was a gamble, a calculated dose based on estimated exposure time and visible symptoms. Too little, and they'd die. Too much, and the treatment itself could kill them. The second extraction team arrived 6 minutes later, moving through the building with practice speed. Between Evelyn's team and the new arrivals, they had enough personnel to evacuate everyone. They rigged makeshift stretchers, secured the patients, began the careful process of moving through the contaminated building toward the extraction point. Webb was conscious now, though still weak. He looked up at Evelyn as 2 operators lifted his stretcher. "Chief Cross," his voice was barely a whisper. "Save your strength, Webb." "The others, did they?" "They're alive. You kept them alive long enough for me to get here. That's what matters." She paused. "And your daughter is going to hear about how her dad is a hero. I'll make sure of it." Webb's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with chemical exposure. He nodded once and closed his eyes. The extraction took 23 minutes. 23 minutes of careful navigation through contaminated corridors, of monitoring patients whose conditions could crash at any second, of coordinating with the decontamination teams waiting at the building's perimeter. When they finally emerged into the decon station, Evelyn's suit was registering chemical contamination levels that would have been lethal without protection. The decontamination process was thorough and uncomfortable. Chemical wash, rinse, second wash, equipment removal under controlled conditions. Evelyn stood still while technicians worked around her, her mind already on the next phase. Getting the patients to Mercy Ridge, making sure Kelso followed the protocol, ensuring that none of the lives she'd fought to save slipped away because of inadequate follow-up care. When she finally emerged from decon in a fresh set of fatigues, Hayes was waiting with a grim expression. "We've got confirmation on the device. It was placed by someone with access credentials to the convention center's maintenance systems. This was planned, sophisticated, and targeted." "The researchers." Evelyn's voice was flat. "Someone wanted to kill the people developing chemical defenses. Or test their new weapon against the people most likely to recognize it." Hayes pulled up a file on his tablet. "We're already running down leads, but Chief, this wasn't random. Whoever did this knew about your protocol. They knew we'd call you in. This whole thing might have been designed to draw you out." Evelyn felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Then they've succeeded, and now they know the counter-protocol works, which means they'll modify the agent again. She looked toward the ambulances where the critical patients were being loaded. "How many got out of the building before we arrived?" "Over 200. Most had minimal exposure. They'll need monitoring but should recover fully. It's the 40 who stayed behind that were in real danger. And we saved 6 out of 40. Hayes' expression softened slightly. "Chief, 34 of those 40 were already dead when we got thermal confirmation. The building's HVAC concentrated the agent in specific zones: the main conference hall, the breakout rooms, the service areas. The 6 you pulled out were the only ones with any chance at all." Evelyn nodded slowly. 6 lives. Not enough. Never enough. But it was what they had. "The patients are being transported to Mercy Ridge General," Hayes continued. "But Chief, about that situation, I understand you were suspended from that facility just hours ago. Are you sure sending them there is the right call?" "It's the only call. Mercy Ridge has the equipment, the staff, and now the protocol to keep these people alive." She paused. "And Dr. Kelso is about to learn a very important lesson about the cost of arrogance." At Mercy Ridge General, the first ambulance arrived with lights and sirens screaming. The trauma bay doors crashed open and paramedics rushed in with Webb on a stretcher, monitor readings being shouted over the chaos. Tom Chen was waiting, having read through Cross's protocol 4 times and memorized the critical elements. "Severe VX exposure, modified variant, field treatment administered 28 minutes ago," the paramedic shouted. "Vitals are stable, but the chief said continuous cardiac monitoring is critical." Kelso appeared from the equipment room, his expression controlled but his eyes showing something that might have been fear. He looked down at Webb, at the military insignia on what remained of his tactical gear, at the identification that marked him as the medic who'd gone down trying to save others, and something shifted in his face. "Get him on the table," Kelso ordered, his voice steady. "Full monitoring suite, exactly as specified in the protocol. Tom, I need you checking vitals every 60 seconds. Jennifer, prepare the secondary medications for administration if we see any decline." The second ambulance arrived 90 seconds later, then the third. Within 10 minutes, all 6 critical patients were in Mercy Ridge's trauma bays, connected to monitors, being treated according to the protocol that Evelyn Cross had written from a combination of combat experience and classified research. Kelso moved between patients with mechanical precision, following the instructions exactly as written. No modifications, no assumptions, no ego. Because for the first time in his career, he was operating in a domain where his credentials meant nothing and someone else's hard-won expertise meant everything. He was checking the neural response of the second patient, the woman in her 50s who'd tried to help the others, when his phone buzzed. A message from Cross. "Patient status report required. Any deviations from baseline trigger secondary protocol. Full details in Appendix C." He typed back quickly. "All 6 patients stable, following protocol exactly. No complications yet." The response came within seconds. "Good. I'm inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Kelso looked up at Tom, who was monitoring Webb's vitals with intense concentration. "She's coming here." Tom nodded without looking away from the monitors. "I'd expect nothing less. These are her patients now. She'll want to verify we're doing it right." "Her patients." Kelso repeated the words slowly, tasting their meaning. 6 hours ago, he'd been in the process of destroying this woman's career. Now she was coordinating a federal emergency response, and he was following her orders to save lives she'd personally extracted from a chemical weapons attack. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. 12 minutes later, Evelyn Cross walked through the emergency department entrance in military fatigues, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her face composed but her eyes sharp and assessing. She moved through the space like she owned it, not with arrogance, but with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned their position through blood and competence. Staff members stopped and stared. The nurses who'd ignored her for 6 months. The residents who'd watched Kelso humiliate her. Jennifer Moss, who'd assigned her every degrading task possible. They all froze as she passed, recognition and confusion warring on their faces. Evelyn didn't acknowledge any of them. She walked straight to Trauma 1, where Kelso was bent over Webb's chart, reviewing the latest lab results. "Status," she said without preamble. Kelso straightened. For a moment, he looked like he might try to maintain some kind of hierarchical fiction. Then he simply handed her the chart. All 6 patients are stable. Neural responses are good. Cardiac function is improving. We've had no complications and no deviations from your protocol. Evelyn scanned the chart with practiced efficiency, her eyes moving across numbers and readings that told her everything she needed to know. After a moment, she nodded. Good work, doctor. You followed instructions well. The words were simple, professional, appropriate. But in the context of their history, they landed like a hammer blow. Kelso's face flushed, but he said nothing. Evelyn moved to Webb's bedside, checking the monitor readings herself, her fingers gentle as she checked his pulse. Webb's eyes opened, more focused now, more present. Chief, he managed, his voice stronger than before. Rest easy, Marcus. You're going to be fine. The treatment's working exactly as designed. She glanced at his chart again. Though you're going to have a hell of a headache for the next few days. Worth it, Webb whispered. We got them all out? Every single one. Because you stayed with them when your suit failed. That was brave and stupid in exactly the right proportions. She almost smiled. Your daughter would be proud. Webb's eyes closed again, but this time there was peace in his expression. Evelyn moved through the other trauma bays with the same systematic efficiency, checking each patient, verifying each treatment, making minor adjustments to medication dosages based on individual responses. Kelso followed her, watching, learning, beginning to understand exactly how far out of his depth he'd been. When she'd completed her rounds, she found a quiet corner of the emergency department and pulled out her phone. A series of encrypted messages waited. Updates from Hayes, intelligence reports on the device, preliminary analysis of how the agent had been modified. She responded to each with clipped efficiency, her mind already processing implications and next steps. Tom Chen approached cautiously. Chief Cross? I just wanted to say, what you did tonight was incredible, and I'm sorry for not speaking up before. When Dr. Kelso was, don't apologize for other people's failures, Evelyn said quietly, not looking up from her phone. You did your job tonight. That's what matters. But for 6 months, you didn't know. She finally looked at him, and her expression was neutral but not unkind. Most of my real work is classified. The credentials you saw on my resume were the minimum I was allowed to reveal. You had no way of knowing who I actually was or what I was actually capable of. She paused. Though paying attention to competence rather than titles might have been a good idea regardless. Tom nodded slowly, absorbing that. What happens now? Now? Evelyn glanced toward the trauma bays where 6 people were alive because she'd refused to accept Dr. Kelso's authority when it conflicted with saving lives. Now we see whether this hospital is capable of learning from its mistakes. Behind them, unnoticed by either of them, Dr. Adrian Kelso stood in the doorway of Trauma 1, his phone in his hand, staring at an email that had just arrived from the hospital board. The subject line read, Emergency Administrative Review, Dr. Kelso. His hands were shaking as he opened it. The message was brief and devastating. Given tonight's events and new information regarding Chief Petty Officer Cross's credentials and service record, the board requires your immediate presence for an emergency review of recent personnel decisions and department protocols. All disciplinary actions against CPO Cross are suspended pending investigation. Your presence is required at 600 tomorrow morning. This is not optional. Kelso looked through the glass at Evelyn, who was now conferring with a federal agent about something on a tablet. The woman who'd been invisible for 6 months. The woman he'd dismissed, humiliated, and tried to destroy. The woman who'd just saved 6 lives while coordinating a federal emergency response and making him look like a first-year medical student in the process. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from the Chief of Staff. Adrian, what the hell have you done? Kelso didn't have an answer. In the trauma bay, Evelyn's phone erupted with a priority alert. She glanced at the screen and her expression went flat. Hayes' message was brief. Second device located, active. Different agent profile. Need you back downtown now. She looked at the 6 patients in the trauma bays, stable, improving, going to survive. Then she looked at her phone, at the new crisis that was unfolding, at the reality that this wasn't over. Not even close. She turned to Kelso, who'd emerged from Trauma 1 looking like a man who just received very bad news. Doctor, these patients need continuous monitoring for the next 72 hours minimum. Any change in neural function, any cardiac irregularity, any sign of relapse. You follow the contingency protocols in Appendix D. Do you understand? I understand, Kelso said quietly. Good. Evelyn was already moving toward the exit. Because if any of them die because you decided to improvise or second-guess the protocol, I will personally ensure that your medical license becomes a decorative piece of paper suitable for framing and nothing else. She was gone before he could respond, striding through the emergency department with the same purposeful intensity she'd arrived with. Staff members scattered out of her way. The automatic doors opened and she disappeared into the night, heading back toward whatever fresh hell was waiting downtown. In the silence she left behind, Jennifer Moss turned to Tom Chen with an expression of dawning horror. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What have we done?" Tom didn't answer. He was watching through the window as a black SUV pulled up to collect Evelyn as she climbed in without hesitation, as the vehicle accelerated away with the kind of urgency that suggested the night's crisis was far from over. And in Trauma 1, Marcus Webb opened his eyes and looked at the monitor above his bed, at the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, at the evidence that he was going to survive to see his daughter again. He thought about the woman who'd pulled him back from the edge of death, not with luck or guesswork, but with skill forged in places where hesitation meant body bags. The woman everyone had ignored. The woman who'd just shown an entire hospital exactly what they'd been too blind to see. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and somewhere in the darkness of Riverside Falls, a second device was counting down toward activation, and the only person qualified to stop it was racing back into danger while the people who'd spent months belittling her were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. The SUV hit 80 miles per hour on the empty downtown streets, emergency lights strobing against the facades of evacuated buildings. Evelyn was already pulling up tactical data on her tablet, her eyes scanning thermal overlays and chemical sensor readings that painted a picture far worse than the first device. "Talk to me," she said into her headset, her voice cutting through the encrypted channel that connected her directly to Hayes and the Federal Command Center. Hayes's response was tense. "Second device is in the underground parking structure beneath the Riverside Commerce Tower. Construction worker found it during a security sweep. It's larger than the first device. Different chemical signature, and it's on a timer. We've got 18 minutes before activation." Chemical signature? Evelyn's fingers flew across the screen, pulling up spectrographic analysis. That's the problem. It's not VX. It's not anything in our database. Whatever this is, it's custom built, and our sensors are showing compound markers that suggest it's designed to be resistant to standard decontamination procedures. Evelyn felt ice crystallize in her chest. They're testing variants. The convention center was the field trial for their modified VX. This is something else entirely. They want to see if we can adapt in real time. "Can we?" Hayes asked bluntly. "I don't know yet." Evelyn zoomed in on the molecular analysis, her training kicking in automatically. Years of studying chemical warfare agents, of breaking down compounds into their component parts, of learning to identify threats by their structural signatures. But I'm going to need direct access to that device. "Can your team disable the timer?" "Negative." EOD took a look at the mechanism. It's got tamper detection. Any attempt to disarm it triggers immediate release. We'd need a specialist, and the nearest one is 3 hours away. "Then we don't disarm it, we contain it." Evelyn's mind was already racing through possibilities, calculating odds, weighing risks. What's the blast radius if this thing activates? Based on the device size and the ventilation system in that structure, the entire tower gets contaminated, plus 6 surrounding blocks if the wind carries it. We're looking at potential exposure for anyone still in the downtown area, roughly 2,000 people who refused evacuation or emergency personnel. The SUV screeched to a halt at the perimeter established around the Commerce Tower. Evelyn was out before the vehicle fully stopped, striding toward the command post where Hayes and a cluster of federal agents were huddled around computer displays showing real-time feeds from inside the parking structure. Hayes looked up as she approached. He was older than she'd initially thought, probably late 40s, with the weathered appearance of someone who'd spent a career in crisis zones. "Chief Cross, we've got a problem." "I heard. Show me the device." He pulled up a feed from a robot camera that had been sent into the structure. The device sat in the center of a parking level, deliberately placed where it would have maximum dispersal through the building's ventilation intake. It was sophisticated. Military-grade construction, professional assembly, the kind of thing that required expertise and resources. The timer read 16 minutes and 43 seconds. Evelyn studied the chemical sensors positioned around the device. The compound signature. It's showing organophosphate markers but with unusual binding chains. This isn't a standard nerve agent. They've built something hybrid. English, Chief, Hayes said quietly. They've combined multiple agent types into a single compound. Nerve agent characteristics for immediate lethality, but with persistent chemical markers that suggest it won't break down naturally. If this activates, standard treatment won't work because we'll be fighting multiple mechanisms of action simultaneously. She looked up from the screen. This is weaponized chemistry at a level I've only seen in classified military research. Martinez appeared at Evelyn's shoulder, already suited in full MOPP-4 gear. Chief, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I need to tell you that's a terrible idea. I need to get to that device, Evelyn said calmly. I need direct chemical analysis, not remote sensing. The only way to formulate a counteragent is to know exactly what we're dealing with. The structure is compromised, Hayes cut in. Engineering assessment shows that parking level has structural damage from a vehicle impact last month. Add the weight of a full hazmat team and the vibrations from movement, and we risk collapse. Then I go alone. Minimal weight, minimal disturbance. Evelyn was already moving toward the equipment truck. Chief? Martinez started, but Evelyn cut her off with a look. 14 minutes, Lieutenant. I don't have time to debate. Get me suited up and get me mobile analysis equipment. If I can identify the compound structure, I can design a counter protocol. But I need to be there, not here. The suiting process took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of Evelyn standing perfectly still while technicians sealed her into protective gear, while they attached portable analysis equipment to her suit's hardpoints, while they triple-checked every seal and connection. Through it all, her mind was running calculations, reviewing everything she knew about hybrid chemical agents, preparing for what she might find. Hayes pulled her aside just before she entered the structure. Chief, if this goes wrong, if you get exposed, or if that structure comes down, we can't extract you in time. You understand that? I understand. Evelyn's voice was steady. But 2,000 people die if I don't try. The math is simple. The math is never simple when it's your life on the line. Then it's a good thing I've had practice with complicated math. She checked her suit's air supply one final time. 11 minutes. I need to move. The parking structure's entrance yawned before her like a mouth, emergency lighting casting everything in sickly yellow. Evelyn descended the ramp with careful, measured steps, her suit's built-in sensors feeding her constant data about air quality, structural integrity, and the chemical signature that was growing stronger with each level. I'm at level B2, she reported into her comm. Chemical readings are spiking. The device is definitely active. I'm seeing trace dispersal already. Someone armed this thing early. Hayes' voice crackled back. How early? Based on the concentration gradient, I'd say it's been releasing trace amounts for the past 30 minutes. Not enough to trigger our perimeter sensors, but enough to contaminate the immediate area. Evelyn's jaw tightened. This was designed to create a false sense of security, make us think we had time when we didn't. She reached level B3 and saw it, the device sitting in the center of the empty parking level, surrounded by a halo of chemical sensors that were all screaming warnings. The timer read 8 minutes and 17 seconds. Evelyn approached slowly, her portable analysis unit already sampling the air. The readings that came back made her stop breathing for a moment. Hayes, I've got positive ID on 3 separate agent compounds, sarin derivative, VX variant, and something I don't recognize, possibly a synthetic opioid with rapid absorption characteristics. She moved closer, her gloved hands already preparing sample collection equipment. They've built a cocktail designed to overwhelm any single treatment approach. Can you counter it? Hayes' voice was tight. I'm working on it. Evelyn deployed her sampling probe, carefully extracting a tiny amount of the compound for direct analysis. Her suit's built-in spectrometer began breaking down the molecular structure, displaying results on her heads-up display. The opioid component is the wild card. Standard nerve agent treatment uses atropine and pralidoxim, but opioid overdose requires naloxone. Combining all three has contraindication risks. Meaning if I get the dosage wrong, the treatment kills people instead of saving them. Evelyn's fingers moved across her tablet, running simulations, calculating binding coefficients, estimating metabolic pathways. But if I don't try, they die anyway. The timer hit 6 minutes. Behind her, a grinding sound echoed through the structure. Evelyn froze, her eyes tracking to the concrete pillars that supported the levels above. Hairline cracks were visible in several of them, and as she watched, one of the cracks extended fractionally. "Chief, we're seeing movement on the structural sensors," Martinez's voice cut in. "You need to get out of there." "Not yet." Evelyn forced herself to focus on the analysis, to ignore the groaning concrete and the timer counting down and the very real possibility that she was about to be buried alive. The molecular structure was revealing itself piece by piece. The sarin derivative was modified with a chelating agent that would make it persist in tissue. The VX variant had an enhanced skin absorption characteristic, and the opioid component was fentanyl-based, but with a modification that increased potency by a factor of 10. "It's elegant," she murmured, almost to herself. "Whoever designed this understands pharmacology at a level that's honestly impressive." "Chief, 5 minutes," Hayes said urgently. "Whatever you're going to do." "I've got it." Evelyn was already calculating the counter protocol, her mind racing through the complex interaction of multiple antidotes. 3-stage treatment. First stage is high-dose naloxone to block the opioid receptors before they can cascade. Second stage is combined atropine and pralidoxim at specific ratios to counter the nerve agents. Third stage is a chelating compound to help clear the persistent components. She paused, double-checking her calculations. But it has to be administered in sequence. Wrong order or wrong timing, and the interactions will cause cardiac arrest. "Can you synthesize it in time?" "No. But I can transmit the formula to your field lab, and they can start production while I deal with the immediate problem." Evelyn sent the data burst, then turned her attention to the device itself. "Hayes, I need you to clear the entire downtown perimeter, 6 blocks minimum. If this thing goes off, everyone in the dispersal zone needs to be behind hard cover with NBC protection." "We've already started evacuation, but 6 blocks, Chief, that's going to take time we don't have." "Then make time." Evelyn studied the device, looking for any option she'd missed, any way to prevent activation. The timer read 3 minutes and 41 seconds. "And get your medical teams ready. If I'm wrong about any part of this protocol, we're going to have mass casualties." At Mercy Ridge General, Dr. Adrian Kelso was reviewing lab results on the 6 chemical exposure patients when his phone erupted with an emergency alert. The message was from the Federal Command Center, marked Priority 1, and it made his blood run cold. Second device identified, mass casualty event imminent. Prepare for 50-plus critical chemical exposures. New agent profile, treatment protocol to follow. Chief Cross is formulating countermeasures in the field. Kelso looked up at the emergency department, at his staff who were still processing the events of the past few hours, at the trauma bays that were already occupied with critical patients. 50 more casualties. A new chemical agent, a treatment protocol that didn't exist yet. He pulled Tom Chen aside. "I need you to assemble every available physician, emergency medicine, internal medicine, anesthesiology, anyone with critical care experience, and I need you to clear every available bed in this hospital. We're about to get hit with something we've never seen before." Tom's face went pale. "Sir, what's happening?" "Chief Cross is trying to prevent a mass casualty event downtown. If she fails, or if she succeeds but people still get exposed, they're all coming here." Kelso's voice was grim. "And we're going to have to keep them alive using a treatment protocol that's being invented right now by a woman I tried to fire 6 hours ago." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. In the parking structure, Evelyn had moved to the building's ventilation system access panel. If she couldn't disarm the device, maybe she could contain the dispersal. The panel was locked, but her suit included basic breaching tools. She forced it open and examined the ductwork. "I can seal the primary intake," she reported. "It won't stop the release, but it'll limit dispersal to this level only. The building's negative pressure will keep most of the agent contained underground. Most? Hayes echoed. Nothing's perfect. Some will escape through the exit ramps and emergency vents, but it's better than the entire building becoming a distribution system. Evelyn was already pulling explosive sealant from her kit, military-grade foam that would harden into an airtight barrier within seconds. She began applying it to the ventilation intake, working with practiced speed. The timer hit 2 minutes. Another grinding sound, louder this time. The crack in the nearest support pillar extended another 6 inches. Concrete dust drifted down from the ceiling. "Chief?" "The structure is failing," Martinez said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "You need to abort. Now." 30 more seconds. Evelyn applied the last of the sealant, watching it expand and harden, sealing the ventilation system. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it would save lives. Hundreds of lives. The timer hit 90 seconds. Evelyn turned and ran. Not the careful, measured steps from before, but an all-out sprint toward the exit ramp, her heavy suit making her movements awkward, but adrenaline overriding every limitation. Behind her, she could hear the timer's mechanical tick echoing through the empty structure. 60 seconds. She hit the ramp to level B2, taking the incline as fast as her legs could move. The suit's air supply was reading critically low. She'd been breathing hard, consuming oxygen faster than planned. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. 45 seconds. Level B1 now. She could see the exit ahead, could see Martinez and her team positioned just outside the structure, waving her forward with urgent gestures. The structural groaning was constant now, the building actively failing around her. 30 seconds. Evelyn burst out of the parking structure and didn't stop running. Martinez grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the blast barrier that had been erected 200 yards away. They made it behind the concrete and steel barrier with 15 seconds to spare. Evelyn collapsed against the barrier, her chest heaving, her suit's air supply reading empty. Martinez yanked off her helmet and Evelyn gasped in fresh air, her vision clearing slowly. "That was insane," Martinez said, her voice shaking slightly. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen, and I've been deployed to some seriously crazy situations." Evelyn couldn't respond. She was counting down in her head. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The device activated with a sound like a compressed air release, a hiss that carried across the empty streets. Through the barriers, they could see chemical vapor pouring from the parking structure's exit ramps, a visible cloud that spread and then, abruptly, stopped spreading as much as it should have. The sealant was working. Not perfectly, but enough. "Dispersal is contained, Bishos," Hayes reported from the command center, watching sensor readings. "You did it, Chief. It's not ideal, but you just saved approximately 1,800 lives by limiting the spread." Evelyn nodded, still breathing hard. "What about exposures?" "We're showing elevated readings in a 2-block radius, but nothing like what we would have seen with full dispersal. Emergency personnel in the area are moving to decon stations now." Hayes paused. "Chief, we've got incoming reports. 6 emergency responders are showing symptoms. They were close to the exit ramps when the device activated." "Then get them to Mercy Ridge immediately. The treatment protocol I transmitted, your lab needs to synthesize it now and deliver it to the hospital within 30 minutes. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the way her legs shook from exertion and oxygen deprivation. "I need to be there when they arrive." "Chief, you've been breathing filtered air for almost an hour. You just ran out of a collapsing building and you nearly passed out from hypoxia. You need medical attention yourself." "What I need is to make sure those 6 responders don't die because someone administered my protocol incorrectly." Evelyn stripped off the rest of her protective gear with mechanical efficiency. "Get me transport to Mercy Ridge. Now." Martinez looked at Hayes, who shrugged helplessly. "She outranks both of us," he said simply. The ride back to Mercy Ridge took 8 minutes, but it felt like hours. Evelyn used the time to refine her protocol, to run additional simulations on her tablet, to prepare herself for what was coming. 6 patients with exposure to a hybrid chemical agent that had never been countered before. 6 lives depending on her getting the chemistry right. No pressure. The SUV pulled up to the emergency entrance just as the first ambulance arrived. Evelyn was out before the vehicle stopped, striding toward the trauma bay where Kelso was already directing staff with clipped, urgent commands. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment their eyes met. "The protocol," he said without preamble. "I've reviewed it. The contraindication risks are significant." "I know." Evelyn moved to the supply area where the synthesized counteragents had just been delivered. She checked each vial, verifying concentrations, ensuring everything matched her specifications exactly. That's why the sequencing and timing are critical. First injection must be administered within 90 seconds of patient arrival. Second injection exactly 5 minutes later. Third injection based on cardiac response. If QT interval shows prolongation, you hold until it normalizes. And if it doesn't normalize, then we have bigger problems. Evelyn loaded the first set of injections into auto-injector systems. But the alternative is watching them die from multi-system failure, so we don't have the luxury of hesitation. The first patient crashed through the doors, a firefighter, male, mid-30s, already showing advanced symptoms, respiratory distress, pinpoint pupils, muscle rigidity, the unmistakable signs of nerve agent exposure combined with opioid overdose. His partner was shouting vital signs, but Evelyn was already at the stretcher, her trained eye assessing everything in seconds. "Get him on the table," she ordered. "Full monitoring suite. Tom, I need you on airway management. He's going to need intubation within 2 minutes. Jennifer, prepare the injector sequence exactly as I showed you." For a moment, Jennifer Moss just stared at her. This woman she'd spent 6 months assigning the worst tasks. The woman she'd dismissed and belittled. Now that same woman was issuing orders with absolute authority, and Jennifer's hands were moving to obey before her brain fully processed the shift. Evelyn administered the first injection herself, driving the naloxone derivative directly into the patient's thigh. "Starting clock now. Mark the time." Tom was already positioning the intubation equipment, his movements precise despite the pressure. "Chief, his oxygen saturation is dropping fast, 78% and falling. Expected response to the opioid component. The naloxone will reverse it, but we need to support his breathing until it takes effect." Evelyn's hands moved with absolute confidence, adjusting oxygen flow, monitoring cardiac rhythm, watching for the telltale signs that the first stage of treatment was working. The second patient arrived 30 seconds later, then the third. Within 5 minutes, all 6 exposed responders were in trauma bays connected to monitors, receiving treatment according to the protocol that Evelyn had designed in a parking structure with a timer counting down to catastrophe. Kelso moved between patients, following her instructions with mechanical precision. He'd stopped questioning, stopped second-guessing. Every action was executed exactly as specified, because he'd finally learned the difference between medical knowledge and combat-tested expertise. The first patient, the firefighter, showed response at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. His pupils began to dilate. His breathing eased. The muscle rigidity started to release. "He's responding," Tom said, his voice tight with relief. "Chief, it's working." "Don't celebrate yet. We're only through stage 1. Evelyn checked the timer. "Prepare stage 2 injections, and someone check on the VX patients from earlier. I want to make sure this crisis hasn't diverted attention from people who still need monitoring." A nurse Evelyn didn't recognize spoke up from across the trauma bay. "Chief Cross? The VX patients are all stable. We've been maintaining the protocols you established. No complications." Evelyn nodded once, then returned her focus to the immediate crisis. Stage 2 injections were administered with precise timing. The combined atropine and pralidoxime cocktail was delivered to each patient according to their individual weight and exposure severity. Then came the waiting, the agonizing minutes where they could only watch monitors and hope the chemistry was right. Patient 2 crashed at the 7-minute mark. Cardiac arrest, sudden and catastrophic. Evelyn was on him instantly, beginning compressions while shouting orders. "Get me the epinephrine! Tom, take over compressions. Jennifer, prepare the defibrillator." The trauma bay erupted into controlled chaos. Compressions, medications, electrical rhythm analysis, shock delivery. 30 seconds of organized violence against death itself. Then the monitor showed a rhythm, irregular, unstable, but present. "We've got him back," Tom gasped, sweat running down his face. "Jesus, we've got him back. Stabilize and continue monitoring." Evelyn's voice remained level despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Cardiac arrest was a possibility I outlined in the protocol. The second stage medications can cause rhythm disturbances in patients with certain genetic markers. He'll need continuous monitoring and probable beta blocker support. She moved to patient 3, adjusting medication dosages, fine-tuning treatment based on individual responses. This was the art of medicine combined with the science of chemistry, using established principles but adapting in real time to the unique variables each patient presented. Patient 5 showed unexpected neurological symptoms at the 10-minute mark, seizure activity that wasn't in Evelyn's predicted response pattern. She administered a benzodiazepine derivative to control the seizures while her mind raced through possibilities. What had she missed? What interaction hadn't she accounted for? Then it hit her. Check his medical history. I need to know if he's on any prescribed medications. The paramedic who'd brought him in dug through paperwork. Yeah, he's on an SSRI. Antidepressant. Is that relevant? Extremely relevant. Evelyn was already adjusting her protocol. SSR is interact with the opioid derivative in ways that can lower seizure threshold. He needs additional GABA support and probably a different dosage ratio on the stage 3 medications. She made the adjustments, administered the modified treatment, and watched as the seizure activity gradually subsided. Another variable accounted for. Another life pulled back from the edge. By the 40-minute mark, all 6 patients were stable. Not perfect, several would need days of intensive care, and there would be complications to manage, but alive, breathing, hearts beating steadily. Evelyn stepped back from the last patient, her scrubs soaked with sweat, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. Around her, the trauma bay looked like a war zone. Discarded equipment, medication vials, monitors beeping their steady rhythms of survival. Kelso approached slowly, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just looked at her. This woman he'd spent 6 months dismissing, who'd just orchestrated the successful treatment of 12 chemical warfare casualties using protocols she'd developed partly in real time. That was remarkable, he finally said, his voice quiet. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. You've never practiced emergency medicine in a combat zone, doctor. What you just witnessed was Tuesday for me in Syria. The only difference is better equipment and no one shooting at us. The words hung in the air between them. A statement of fact, not boasting, just a simple truth that illuminated exactly how far apart their experiences had been. Before Kelso could respond, Hayes appeared in the trauma bay entrance, his expression grim. Chief Cross, we need to talk, now. Evelyn followed him to a quiet corner of the emergency department. Hayes pulled up something on his tablet, security camera footage from the convention center, timestamped from 12 hours before the attack. We've been analyzing the surveillance feeds, Hayes said quietly. The person who placed the first device had access credentials, high-level credentials. They knew the building's security systems, knew the HVAC layout, knew exactly where to place the device for maximum dispersal. Inside job, Evelyn said flatly. I assumed as much. What's the bad news? Hayes enlarged a section of the footage. The figure placing the device was careful, professional, but for just a moment they'd turned toward a camera. The image was grainy, partially obscured, but there was something about the posture, the movement patterns. We ran facial recognition, Hayes continued. 73% match to a former DoD contractor, chemical weapons research. They had access to your classified protocols from the Syria deployment. Evelyn felt ice spread through her chest. They know the countermeasures because they worked on developing them. Worse, we pulled their personnel file. They were flagged for concerning behavior 3 years ago, obsessive interest in weaponizing defensive research, multiple security violations, possible foreign intelligence contacts. They were terminated, but apparently that wasn't the end of their interest in the work. And now they're testing enhanced agents against the counter-protocols they helped develop. Evelyn's mind was racing ahead, seeing the pattern, understanding the full scope of what they were facing. The convention center was a field test. The parking structure was proof of concept. Hayes, if they're following standard weapons development protocols, there's going to be a third device, Hayes finished grimly. Larger scale, more sophisticated, incorporating everything they learned from watching how we responded to the first 2. Where? Evelyn demanded. We don't know yet, but Chief... Hayes's expression was deeply troubled. The surveillance from the parking structure shows something else. Someone was watching your response. Professional counter surveillance, but our analysts caught thermal signatures of an observer positioned to have clear line of sight on your entire operation. They documented your tactics, your response time, your methodology. They're studying me, Evelyn said quietly, using my own counter protocols to design agents I can't stop. That's the assessment. Hayes paused. We're recommending you pull back. Let someone else take lead on the response. You're too valuable to No. Evelyn's voice was flat, absolute. If they're designing this to counter my protocol specifically, then I'm the only person who can adapt fast enough to stop them. Pulling me out plays into exactly what they want. Chief, this is personal now. They're targeting you specifically. Your judgment might be... My judgment is fine. Evelyn turned to face him fully. I've had people try to kill me before, Hayes. This isn't new territory. What's new is having the resources and support to actually stop them before they can deploy whatever they're building next. She paused. So I'm not pulling back. I'm going to find them, identify their compound before they can deploy it, and design a counter protocol that makes everything they've built obsolete. That's the job. That's what I do. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then we'd better find them fast, because if they deploy device 3 before we locate them... His phone erupted with an alert. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. Oh no! What? Evelyn demanded. Hayes turned the phone so she could see. A news alert. Just breaking. Mass evacuation ordered for Riverside Falls City Hall. Suspicious package reported. Federal response activated. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. City Hall. A government building. High-profile target. And if their adversary was following weapons development protocols, the third device would be bigger, more sophisticated, designed to overcome every countermeasure she'd just demonstrated. How many people are in that building? She asked quietly. At this time of night? Maybe 300? Security, night shift workers, people working late. Hayes was already pulling up building schematics. But Chief, it's worse than that. City Hall connects to the underground metro station. If a device activates there and the contamination reaches the metro, the entire subway system becomes a distribution network, Evelyn finished. Potentially thousands of exposures, cascading through tunnels we can't easily access or decontaminate. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, then opened them with absolute focus. Get me full building access, chemical sensors, and a tactical team. We're going in. Chief, we don't even know if there's actually a device. This could be a false alarm, or it could be a trap designed to... It's not a false alarm, Evelyn said with complete certainty. And yes, it's absolutely a trap, but they've made one critical mistake. What's that? Evelyn's expression was cold, hard, the look of someone who'd survived situations where mistakes meant death. They assumed I would hesitate to walk into a trap if it meant saving lives. They fundamentally misunderstood who they're dealing with. She turned back toward the trauma bay, where Kelso and his team were still monitoring the 12 chemical exposure patients. She caught Kelso's eye across the room, and he straightened, reading something in her expression. Doctor, she called out, her voice carrying across the chaos. You're about to get a masterclass in mass casualty preparedness. Clear every bed in this hospital, call in every off-duty physician, and pray that I'm better at chemistry than whoever designed what's waiting at City Hall. Kelso didn't argue, didn't question. He just nodded once and reached for his phone to start making calls. Evelyn turned back to Hayes. Assemble your best team, full MOPP4, portable analysis equipment, and every chemical sensor we have. We leave in 5 minutes. Chief? Hayes started, but she cut him off. 5 minutes, Hayes, because whoever's watching knows exactly how long it takes to evacuate a building that size. They've timed this perfectly, and our window is already closing. She paused. And Hayes, this one isn't getting away from us. Whatever they've built, whatever they think they know about my protocols, I'm going to show them exactly why you don't bring a chemistry set to a war with someone who wrote the textbook. The emergency department's automatic doors hissed open as Martinez appeared with a tactical team in full gear. The lieutenant's expression was grim but determined. Chief Cross, we're ready when you are. Evelyn looked back one last time at the trauma bays, at the 12 patients who'd survived because she'd refused to accept limitations. at the hospital that had spent 6 months not seeing her until crisis forced them to look. Then she turned toward the doors, toward the waiting vehicles, toward whatever trap had been set at City Hall. "Then let's go to work," she said quietly, and walked out into the night where something far worse than anything they'd faced yet was waiting with a timer counting down and an enemy who knew exactly how she thought, exactly how she'd respond, and had designed their weapon specifically to exploit that knowledge. The tactical convoy moved through empty streets with lights extinguished, navigating by night vision and thermal imaging. Evelyn sat in the lead vehicle, her eyes fixed on the tablet showing real-time sensor data from City Hall. The chemical signatures were there, faint but present, different from both previous devices, suggesting something new had been synthesized. "ETA 90 seconds, Martinez reported from the driver's seat. "Bomb squad already has the perimeter established. They found the package in the basement mechanical room, right next to the ventilation trunk that feeds the metro connection." "Perfect placement," Evelyn murmured. "Whoever designed this knows infrastructure. They understand how buildings breathe, how air moves, how contamination spreads." She pulled up building schematics, overlaying them with ventilation patterns. "If this activates, we're looking at dispersal through 6 square blocks above ground and 3 miles of subway tunnel below." Hayes's voice crackled through the encrypted channel. "Chief, we've completed evacuation of City Hall and the immediate metro station, but we can't shut down the entire subway system without causing mass panic. There are still trains running through adjacent stations, still people in the network. Then we have to contain it at the source." Evelyn was already running calculations, estimating dispersal rates, considering options. "What's the device configuration?" "Larger than the previous two, more sophisticated timing mechanism. And Chief, there's something else. The bomb squad found a camera system integrated with the device. Whoever placed this wants to watch the response in real time." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. They're not just testing the chemical agent, they're testing me specifically, documenting my response, my methodology, my counter-protocols. She looked up at Martinez. "This is a demonstration. They want to prove they can beat the best countermeasures we have." "Can they?" Martinez asked bluntly. "We're about to find out." The convoy stopped 2 blocks from City Hall. Evelyn exited the vehicle and immediately began suiting up, the process automatic now after 3 deployments in one night. Around her, the tactical team moved with practiced efficiency, checking seals, verifying equipment, preparing for entry into what might be a contamination zone. The bomb squad commander approached as Evelyn was securing her helmet. He was older, experienced, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent a career defusing devices designed to kill. His name tape read Morrison. "Chief Cross," he said without preamble. "I've been doing this for 23 years. I've never seen a device like this one. The chemical dispersion mechanism is military grade, but the synthesis equipment attached to it is custom built. Whoever made this wasn't just deploying a weapon, they were manufacturing it on site." Evelyn's mind raced through the implications. They're not transporting finished product, they're bringing precursor chemicals and synthesizing the agent in place to avoid detection. She looked at Morrison. "Can you disarm the timer?" "Not without triggering immediate release. The tamper detection is integrated at a molecular level. Any attempt to interrupt the circuit activates a backup dispersal system." Morrison's expression was grim. "You've got approximately 11 minutes before automatic activation. Then I need to get to that device and identify the compound before it releases." Evelyn checked her portable analysis equipment one final time. "If I can determine the chemical structure, I can start formulating a counter-protocol while you work on containment." "Chief, the mechanical room is structurally unsound. We've got water damage from a pipe burst last month, electrical hazards, and questionable ventilation. If that device releases while you're in there, then I'll be the first casualty and you'll have my analysis data to work with for the rest." Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact. "But I'm not going to let that happen." She moved toward the City Hall entrance before Morrison could argue further. Martinez and 2 other operators fell in behind her, their movements synchronized from years of working together in situations where coordination meant survival. The building's interior was eerily quiet, emergency lighting casting long shadows, the normal bustle of government work replaced by abandonment. Evelyn navigated through corridors and stairwells with her tablet guiding her, chemical sensors showing the trace signatures growing stronger as they descended. Basement level, she reported into her comm. Chemical readings are increasing. I'm detecting organophosphate compounds, synthetic opioid markers, and something else, halogenated hydrocarbons, possibly a blistering agent component. Hayes' voice came back tight with concern. They've added a blistering agent? Chief, that changes everything. Standard protective equipment might not be sufficient if... I know what it changes. Evelyn's jaw tightened. They're making this as lethal as possible while still keeping it within the operational parameters I wrote protocols for. They want to prove that even knowing what's coming, I can't stop it. The mechanical room door stood open, revealing a space filled with pipes, electrical panels, and the massive HVAC equipment that serviced the building. And there, in the center of it all, sat the device. It was beautiful in its own terrible way. Professional construction, elegant engineering, the synthesis equipment gleaming under the emergency lights. The timer read 8 minutes and 34 seconds. And mounted beside it, just as Hayes had warned, was a camera system with a blinking red light indicating active transmission. Evelyn stared directly into the camera lens. I know you're watching, she said quietly. I know you think you've designed something I can't counter, but you've made 3 critical mistakes. She moved to the device, her portable analysis equipment already sampling the air around it. The chemical signature was complex, multiple compounds in a carefully balanced mixture, each one chosen to interact with the others in ways that would overwhelm standard treatment. Mistake number 1, Evelyn continued, speaking to the camera as her hands worked. You assumed I would be limited to my published protocols. You forgot that I've been developing new countermeasures for 3 years since those protocols were classified. Her spectrometer readings were streaming to her heads-up display, showing molecular structures that made her breath catch. They'd combined a nerve agent, an opioid, a blistering agent, and something else. A compound she didn't immediately recognize, but that had markers suggesting it was a synthetic toxin designed to cause rapid organ failure. Mistake number 2, she said, her fingers flying across her tablet. You assumed I would try to counter each component separately, but combined toxicology is my specialty. I don't treat components, I treat systems. She was already running simulations, testing theoretical combinations of antidotes, looking for a cocktail that would address multiple mechanisms simultaneously. The timer hit 7 minutes. Martinez shifted nervously behind her. Chief, we should start preparing fallback positions in case... Negative. Evelyn's voice was absolute. If this device activates, there is no fallback position. The dispersal through the metro system will create a cascade we can't contain. We stop it here or we don't stop it at all. She pulled up her previous protocols, the ones from Syria, from classified operations, from research that had never been published. She began modifying them in real time, adjusting for the additional compounds, calculating interaction effects, designing a treatment sequence that addressed multiple toxic mechanisms in rapid succession. And mistake number 3, Evelyn said to the camera, is the most critical one. You assumed this was about chemistry, about who has the better formula, the more sophisticated compound. But this was never about chemistry. It's about conviction. And you're about to learn that I will burn my own protocols to the ground if that's what it takes to save lives. She transmitted her modified treatment protocol to Hayes, to Mercy Ridge General, to every medical facility in the Federal Response Network. It was radical. Combining medications that had known contraindications, using dosages that would make any hospital pharmacist refuse to fill the prescription, sequencing treatments in ways that violated every standard guideline. But it would work. She knew it would work because she understood not just the chemistry, but the physiology, not just the mechanisms, but the human body's incredible capacity to survive if given the right support at the right time. The timer hit 5 minutes. Morrison's voice crackled through her comm. Chief, I've got an idea for containment. If we can flood this room with fire suppression foam, it might bind to the chemical compounds before they can disperse. It won't neutralize them, but it could buy us time. Do it, Evelyn ordered, but wait for my signal. I need 2 more minutes to finish the analysis. She deployed a sampling probe, carefully extracting a tiny amount of the synthesized compound from the device's reservoir. The risk was enormous. Any contamination, any suit breach, and she'd become a casualty herself. But she needed direct analysis, needed to know exactly what she was dealing with. The results made her pause. The synthetic toxin component was based on ricin, but heavily modified to increase absorption and decrease the time to symptoms. Whoever had designed this understood protein chemistry at a level that suggested advanced academic training, possibly doctoral-level research. "Hayes," she said quietly into her comm, "I need you to pull employment records for everyone who worked on the DoD Chemical Defense Program from 2018 to 2022. Cross-reference with advanced degrees in biochemistry or molecular toxicology. Our subject has expertise that goes beyond standard military training." "On it," Hayes responded. "But Chief, we've got a problem developing topside. Media has gotten wind of the situation. News helicopters are en route. This is about to become very public, very fast." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. A public crisis meant public scrutiny, which meant whoever was orchestrating this would get exactly what they wanted, a demonstration of their capabilities broadcast to anyone watching. But it also meant accountability, witnesses, documentation. "Let them film," she said finally, "but make sure they understand the stakes. This isn't a story about a terrorist attack. This is a story about someone trying to prove that our best defenses can be overcome. And I'm about to prove them wrong." The timer hit 3 minutes. Evelyn finished her analysis and stepped back from the device. "Morrison, initiate foam deployment. Martinez, pull your team back to the stairwell. Everyone behind hard cover in 30 seconds. The tactical team moved with disciplined speed, retreating to positions that would provide protection from chemical dispersal. Evelyn was the last to leave the mechanical room, her eyes locked on the device as she backed toward the door. "Hayes, I'm transmitting the complete chemical profile now," she said, her voice steady despite the timer counting down behind her. "The treatment protocol I sent earlier needs one modification. Add dimercaprol to the 3rd stage to counter the heavy metal chelation from the ricin derivative. Without it, patients will appear to recover and then crash 12 hours later from delayed organ toxicity." "Understood. Updating protocol now." Hayes paused. "Chief, the media is broadcasting live. Whatever happens in the next 2 minutes is going to be seen by everyone." "Good," Evelyn said quietly. "Then let's show them what competence looks like." Morrison triggered the fire suppression system. Foam exploded into the mechanical room, thick chemical suppressant designed to smother fires but repurposed now to bind toxic compounds. It wouldn't stop the device from activating, but it would slow dispersal, would give them precious seconds to contain the release. The timer hit 90 seconds. Evelyn sealed the mechanical room door and deployed additional foam around the frame, creating a makeshift airlock. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about this situation was perfect, but it was better than allowing free dispersal into the building. 60 seconds. "All personnel, final positions," she ordered. "Full NBC protocols. Nobody moves until we have clear sensor readings showing contamination levels." The team crouched behind concrete and steel, their suits' filtration systems at maximum capacity, their training keeping them calm despite the knowledge that death could be seconds away. 30 seconds. Evelyn's mind was already 3 steps ahead. If the containment failed, she had contingency plans. If casualties occurred, she had treatment protocols ready. If this became a mass exposure event, she knew exactly which hospitals to route patients to and which medications to prioritize. Every scenario had been gamed out, every variable accounted for. 10 seconds. She found herself thinking about the past 6 months, about being invisible, about scrubbing floors and absorbing contempt, about choosing to remain silent because the mission mattered more than recognition, and about how every moment of that experience had led to this, to being the only person in 3 states who could stand in front of a weapon designed specifically to kill her and respond with absolute professional calm. The device activated. The sound was different from the previous 2, not a hiss, but a sharp crack as the synthesis chamber ruptured and the chemical mixture began to disperse. Through the mechanical room's small window, Evelyn could see foam turning colors as it reacted with the toxic compounds, binding and neutralizing where it could, slowing dispersal where it couldn't. Chemical sensors screamed warnings. The readings were bad. Elevated toxin levels, multiple compound signatures, dispersal patterns that indicated some of the agent was escaping the foam containment, but it was slower than it should have been, limited instead of catastrophic, contained instead of cascading. Dispersal is restricted to the mechanical room and immediate corridor, Hayes reported, his voice carrying barely controlled relief. The foam is working. Chemical levels in the main building and metro connection are elevated but not critical. We can manage this. Evelyn didn't allow herself to feel relief yet. Get decon teams to the affected areas immediately. Anyone who was in the building within the past 30 minutes needs screening. And I want environmental monitoring for the next 72 hours. Some of these compounds are persistent enough to remain dangerous even after initial dispersal. She stood slowly, her suit's sensors showing safe atmospheric readings in her position. Around her, the tactical team was beginning to move, beginning to process that they'd just survived something designed to kill them. Martinez pulled off her helmet, her face pale but composed. "Chief, that was incomplete," Evelyn interrupted. "We stopped the dispersal, but we didn't catch the person responsible. They're still out there, still watching, still planning." She turned toward the mechanical room where the device sat empty, its chemical payload spent. "And they just learned that I can adapt to their modifications faster than they expected." Morrison approached, his expression mixing respect and concern. "Chief Cross, the camera system on the device was transmitting to an encrypted server. We're trying to trace it, but whoever set this up knew how to hide their digital tracks. It's going to take time." "We don't have time." Evelyn pulled up the device's camera feed on her tablet, studying the angle, the positioning, the specific view it had been designed to capture. "They wanted footage of me working, wanted to see my methodology, my analysis techniques, my response patterns." She zoomed in on a detail in the corner of the frame. "But they made a mistake. They positioned the camera to watch me so intently that they captured their own reflection." Morrison leaned in, squinting at the screen. There, barely visible in the polished surface of the synthesis equipment, was a distorted reflection. Not clear enough for facial recognition, but clear enough to show something else. A jacket with distinctive patches. Military style but not standard issue. And visible on one patch was partial text. ICAL Defense Re-S. "Chemical Defense Research," Evelyn read aloud. They were wearing their credentials when they placed the device. They're that confident, that arrogant. She looked up at Morrison. "Send this to Hayes. Cross-reference with the employment records I asked for. Someone who worked in chemical defense research, has advanced knowledge of toxicology, and is arrogant enough to wear their professional identification while committing terrorism." At Mercy Ridge General Hospital, the emergency department had transformed into a command center. Every available physician had been called in. Every trauma bay was prepared for potential casualties. And in the center of it all, Dr. Adrian Kelso stood watching news coverage of the City Hall incident on the waiting room television. The footage was dramatic. Federal agents in tactical gear, the building evacuation, the tense moments before the device activated. And there, in the center of every critical moment, was Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross, moving with absolute confidence, issuing orders that people followed without question. The news anchor was breathless with excitement. "We're now learning that the federal responder coordinating this crisis is actually a Navy combat medic who has been working undercover at Mercy Ridge General Hospital for the past 6 months. Sources tell us that Chief Cross is a decorated veteran with multiple combat deployments and specialized expertise in chemical warfare defense." Hospital staff members we've spoken to expressed shock at the revelation, with several admitting they had no idea who she really was. The camera cut to footage of Evelyn from earlier in the night, emerging from the convention center with rescued patients, her face composed despite the chaos around her. She looked nothing like the quiet nurse who'd scrubbed floors and said nothing. She looked like exactly what she was, a warrior operating in enemy territory. Tom Chen appeared at Kelso's shoulder. "Sir, we just received updated treatment protocols from Chief Cross. She's modified the chemical counteragent formula based on new information from the City Hall device. We need to update our pharmacy stocks immediately." Kelso turned from the television, his expression unreadable. "How many modifications has she made to the protocols tonight?" 7 major revisions, 12 minor adjustments. She's adapting the treatment in real time as she learns more about the chemical compounds." Tom paused. "Sir, what she's doing, the speed of adaptation, the complexity of the chemistry, I've never seen anything like it. I don't think anyone has." "No," Kelso said quietly. "I don't think they have." He looked back at the television, where the news was now showing file footage of chemical weapons incidents from around the world, putting the Riverside Falls attacks in context. And we spent 6 months treating her like she was incompetent. The hospital's administrator, Patricia Rourke, emerged from her office with an expression that suggested she'd just received very bad news. She spotted Kelso and headed straight for him. "Dr. Kelso, my office. Now." In the privacy of her office, Patricia closed the door and turned to face him with barely controlled fury. "I just got off the phone with the Department of Defense. Do you have any idea at all what we've done?" Kelso remained silent. He suspected he was about to find out. Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross is not just a combat medic. She's the principal architect of the United States military's chemical warfare defense protocols. She wrote the textbook, literally wrote the textbook, that every military medic uses for CBRN response. She has security clearances that most generals don't have. She's consulted for NATO, for the UN, for organizations I'm not even allowed to name. Patricia's voice was shaking. "And we suspended her for insubordination because she saved a patient's life in a way that made you look bad." "I didn't know," Kelso started. "You didn't bother to know." Patricia slammed her hand on the desk. "You took one look at her resume, saw nurse, and decided that was all you needed to know. You never asked about the gaps in her employment history. You never questioned why someone with her credentials was working night shifts at a civilian hospital. You just assumed she was exactly what she appeared to be, and treated her accordingly." Kelso felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why was she here? If she's that important, why work at Mercy Ridge? "I just found out. She was here on a federal assignment, investigating potential medical supply chain vulnerabilities that could be exploited for chemical or biological attacks. Her cover was as a low-level nurse because that gave her access to every part of the hospital without raising suspicion." Patricia's expression was bitter. "And instead of just doing her job, she ended up actually working as a nurse because that's who she is. She saw patients who needed help, and she helped them, while we humiliated her for it. The suspension is about to become a lawsuit that will bankrupt this hospital unless we fix it immediately." Patricia pulled up an email on her computer. The DOD's legal team has already sent a preliminary notice. They're preparing a case for wrongful termination, workplace harassment, and interference with a federal investigation. And Dr. Kelso, they're naming you specifically as the primary defendant. The words hit like a physical blow. Kelso sat down slowly, his mind racing through the past 6 months, through every interaction with Evelyn, through every casual cruelty he'd inflicted because he could, because she was below him in the hierarchy, because no one was watching. Except people had been watching. Federal investigators, military oversight, and now the consequences were coming due. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. "We hope, and I mean we pray, that Chief Cross is too busy saving lives to focus on destroying ours." Patricia's voice was grim. "Because based on what I'm seeing tonight, she has every resource of the federal government available to her. She has ironclad documentation of how she was treated, and she has absolutely no reason to show us any mercy." Back at City Hall, Evelyn was coordinating the environmental cleanup when Hayes approached with his tablet showing results from the employment record cross-reference. His expression suggested he'd found something significant. "Chief, I've got a hit on your reflection analysis. Dr. Sarah Chen, 41 years old, PhD in molecular toxicology from Stanford, worked as a senior researcher in the DoD Chemical Defense Program from 2018 to 2022, terminated for security violations and concerns about weaponizing defensive research." Hayes pulled up her personnel photo, an Asian woman with sharp features and intelligent eyes that carried a hint of something unstable. "Where is she now?" Evelyn demanded. "That's the problem. She dropped off the grid 18 months ago. No employment records, no credit card activity, no digital footprint. It's like she ceased to exist." Hayes swiped to another screen. "But we did find something. She published several academic papers before joining the DoD program. Want to guess what her dissertation topic was? Hybrid chemical agents and their resistance to standard countermeasures," Evelyn said flatly. Hayes's eyebrows rose. "How did you—" "Because that's exactly what I would research if I wanted to stay ahead of defensive protocols." Evelyn studied Chen's photo, memorizing features, reading the intelligence and instability in that captured expression. She's brilliant and she's angry. Probably feels she was treated unfairly by the DoD, that her work wasn't appreciated. So she's proving her worth by demonstrating she can beat the system that rejected her. There's more. Hayes pulled up financial records. Before she disappeared, Chen liquidated all her assets, sold her house, cashed out retirement accounts, withdrew everything. Total of approximately $400,000. That's enough to fund a sophisticated operation if you're careful with spending. Evelyn felt pieces clicking into place. She's been planning this for over a year, building devices, synthesizing compounds, studying my published protocols. She looked up at Hayes. Where did she do her graduate work before Stanford? What university? Hayes checked his records. Riverside State University. She was a teaching assistant there for 2 years before he stopped, understanding dawning. She knows the city. She knows the infrastructure, the buildings, the systems. And she chose her targets carefully. Convention center where pharmaceutical researchers gather, people she probably worked with, people who might have contributed to her termination. The Commerce Tower parking structure near where she used to live. And now City Hall, seat of the local government that issued permits for the DoD facility where she worked. Evelyn's voice was cold. This isn't random terrorism. It's revenge. Martinez appeared from the direction of the decontamination area. Chief, we've completed environmental sampling. Contamination levels are dropping faster than expected. The foam containment was more effective than we thought. But we did find something, a personal item near the device placement. It was tucked behind a pipe, like someone left it there deliberately. She held up an evidence bag containing a single item, a university ID card from Riverside State University, dated from 15 years ago, showing a younger Sarah Chen with the same intelligent eyes and a hint of the smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. On the back of the card, written in precise handwriting, was a single line. You were always going to be too late, Cross, but I wanted you to know who beat you. Evelyn stared at the card, at the message, at the arrogance radiating from every word. She's not done. This was just the demonstration phase. She's proven she can deploy devices, proven they can overcome my countermeasures, proven she can stay ahead of our response. She looked up at Hayes. What comes next in a weapons development cycle after successful field testing? Hayes's face went pale. Deployment at scale, multiple simultaneous attacks, maximum casualties to prove operational viability. Exactly. Evelyn pulled up a map of Riverside Falls on her tablet, marking the 3 attack sites. They formed a triangle across the city. She's been mapping vulnerability points, learning response times, analyzing our protocols, refining her approach. And now she's going to hit multiple targets at once, overwhelm our ability to respond, and prove that even knowing she's coming, we can't stop her. How do we find her before she deploys again? Martinez asked. Evelyn studied the map, her mind working through patterns, through logic, through the psychology of someone brilliant and angry and determined to prove their worth. She left her ID deliberately. She wants me to know who she is, wants credit for what she's accomplished. That kind of ego needs an audience. She zoomed in on the university campus. She still has connections to Riverside State, access to labs, to equipment, to places where she can synthesize compounds without raising suspicion. We've already checked the university, Hayes said. Security found no evidence of unauthorized access to chemistry facilities. Because she's not using the main facilities, she's using somewhere she knows won't be monitored. Evelyn pulled up university building schematics, cross-referencing with Chen's graduate student records. Where did she do her dissertation research? Which building? Which lab? Hayes searched through archived records. Peterson Hall, 3rd floor organic chemistry lab. But that building was condemned 2 years ago after structural damage from an earthquake. It's scheduled for demolition next month. Perfect cover. Evelyn was already moving toward the exit. Empty building, no security, but all the equipment's still inside because the university hasn't bothered to remove it before demolition. That's where she's working. The tactical convoy reformed quickly, heading toward Riverside State University's campus on the outskirts of the city. Evelyn spent the drive reviewing everything she knew about Sarah Chen. Brilliant, methodical, driven by resentment and the need to prove superiority. A dangerous combination in someone with expertise in lethal chemistry. Hayes, she said into her comm, I need you to pull Chen's psychological evaluation from her DoD termination. I want to know what the assessor said about her mental state. Several minutes later, Hayes sent through the file. Evelyn read it quickly, her expression growing grimmer with each paragraph. The evaluator had noted narcissistic personality traits with possible paranoid ideation, difficulty accepting criticism or correction, belief that her intelligence entitled her to recognition and advancement, and most critically, concerning fixation on being acknowledged as superior to her peers, particularly female peers, in the defense research community. Evelyn closed the file slowly. Chen's targeting wasn't random. The convention center attack had specifically endangered female pharmaceutical researchers. The enhanced protocols were designed to beat defenses created by a female combat medic. This was personal in ways that went beyond professional rivalry. Chen sees this as a competition, Evelyn said aloud. She's not trying to cause maximum casualties. She's trying to prove she's smarter than me, specifically. That's why she's been so careful to design compounds that overcome my exact protocols. This isn't about terrorism, it's about ego. Martinez glanced at her from the driver's seat. Does that make her more or less dangerous? More, because she won't stop until she feels she's definitively won. And the only way she can feel she's won is if I fail to save lives, despite knowing she's coming. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Which means the final attack is going to be her masterpiece, the demonstration that proves beyond any doubt that she's the superior chemist.
Yes.
The university campus was dark and quiet. Most buildings shut down for the night. Peterson Hall stood at the edge of campus, a 4-story structure with broken windows and yellow caution tape marking it as condemned. It looked abandoned, forgotten, exactly the kind of place someone could work undetected. The tactical team approached carefully, thermal imaging showing no heat signatures inside the building, but chemical sensors were picking up faint traces of organic compounds that suggested recent synthesis activity. She's been here, Evelyn confirmed, studying the sensor readings. Within the past few hours, but she's cleared out, probably moved the operation as soon as she triggered the City Hall device. She moved toward the building entrance, Martinez and her team providing security coverage. We're looking for evidence of what she's planning next. Lab equipment, chemical inventories, anything that tells us what she's synthesizing. They breached the building carefully, moving through corridors lined with outdated equipment and abandoned research materials. The third-floor chemistry lab was exactly as described, filled with equipment that had been cutting-edge 20 years ago but was now obsolete, forgotten, perfect for someone who needed functional tools without oversight. And there, spread across multiple workstations, was evidence of Sarah Chen's work. Synthesis equipment still warm from recent use, chemical compounds in various stages of refinement, and most damning, detailed notes written in that same precise handwriting from the ID card. Evelyn photographed everything, her mind cataloging compounds and processes, understanding with growing horror exactly what Chen had been building. She synthesized enough agent for multiple simultaneous deployments. Based on these quantities and purification levels, I'd estimate she has material for at least 6 devices. 6? Martinez breathed. How do we defend against 6 simultaneous chemical attacks? We don't. Evelyn's voice was flat. We can't position enough resources to respond to 6 separate incidents at once. That's the whole point. She's going to overwhelm our response capacity, prove that even with all our preparation and protocols, we can't save everyone. She continued photographing the notes, seeing Chen's logic laid out in chemical formulas and targeting analysis. But she made one mistake. What's that? Evelyn pointed to a set of notes marked Primary Targets, Final Deployment. The list included 6 locations across Riverside Falls, each chosen for maximum symbolic impact and optimal dispersal characteristics. But they all had one thing in common. They were all places where Evelyn had served, had worked, had made a difference. She's not just attacking the city, she's attacking me personally. These are locations connected to my time at Mercy Ridge General, the coffee shop where I stopped every morning, the community center where I volunteered on my days off, the park where I ran every evening. Evelyn's voice was cold with understanding. She researched everything about my routine, my life here, and she's targeting the places that matter to me specifically. Then we know where she's going to hit, Hayes said through the comm. We can position resources. No, Evelyn interrupted. If we position resources at these locations, she'll know we found her lab. She'll change her plan, hit different targets, and we'll be starting from zero again. She studied the notes more carefully, looking for timing information. We let her proceed with her plan. We prepare quietly, we stage resources without visible deployment, and when she activates these devices, we're ready with countermeasures she doesn't know I've developed. Chief, that's an enormous risk, Martinez said. If your countermeasures don't work, they'll work. Evelyn's voice carried absolute certainty. Because I've been studying her methodology all night. I know how she thinks, how she modifies compounds, what chemical signatures she favors. I can predict what she's built before she deploys it. She paused. And there's one more thing. She wants to watch me fail. She'll position herself somewhere with clear line of sight to multiple attack sites. Somewhere she can observe the chaos, can see me struggle, and ultimately fail to save everyone. We find that observation point, we find her. Hayes pulled up topographical data for Riverside Falls, overlaying the 6 target locations. There was one position that had line of sight to all 6, the clock tower at the old courthouse building, currently undergoing renovation and standing empty. That's where she'll be, Evelyn said with certainty. High ground, clear views, abandoned building that's easy to access. She'll watch from there, and when she thinks she's won, we'll take her into custody. The plan came together quickly. Federal agents would position near the clock tower, ready to move the moment Chen was confirmed at the location. Medical teams would stage near each target site, equipped with the counter protocols Evelyn was already designing based on Chen's lab notes. And Evelyn herself would be mobile, ready to respond to whichever site showed the worst casualties. But first, there was something she needed to do. The drive back to Mercy Ridge General took 20 minutes. Evelyn spent it refining her counter protocols, triple-checking calculations, preparing for what she knew was coming. When the SUV pulled up to the emergency entrance, she saw news vans camped outside, reporters hoping for updates on the chemical attacks. Inside, the hospital was organized chaos. Physicians reviewing protocols, nurses preparing equipment, administrators managing the logistics of what might become the biggest mass casualty event in the city's history. And in the center of it all was Dr. Adrian Kelso, looking older and more uncertain than Evelyn had ever seen him. He spotted her immediately and approached, his expression mixing shame and desperate hope. Chief Cross, the updated protocols you sent. We've implemented everything. The pharmacy is stocked, the staff is trained. We're ready. Evelyn studied him for a long moment. This man who'd humiliated her for 6 months, who'd dismissed her expertise, questioned her competence, tried to destroy her career. This man who now needed her to save his hospital, his reputation, possibly his medical license. Dr. Kelso, she said quietly, in approximately 3 hours, this hospital is going to receive the biggest test it's ever faced. 6 simultaneous chemical attacks across Riverside Falls, dozens of critical casualties. A chemical agent designed specifically to resist standard treatment. And the only reason anyone is going to survive is because I spent the past 12 hours developing countermeasures while you and your colleagues finally learned to follow instructions. Kelso's face flushed, but he didn't look away. I know, and I know that nothing I say can You're right, it can't. Evelyn's voice was cold. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to run this emergency department exactly as I've specified. You're going to follow my protocols without deviation or question. You're going to treat my patients with the same care and respect you'd give to anyone else. And when this is over, when lives have been saved and the crisis has passed, you're going to stand in front of the hospital board and explain exactly how a decorated combat medic spent 6 months being treated like incompetent labor because you were too arrogant to see past your own assumptions. I will, Kelso said quietly. I promise you, I will. Good. Evelyn turned toward the trauma bay, then paused and looked back. And Dr. Kelso, when you make that explanation to the board, I want you to remember something. I could have walked away. When you suspended me, when you tried to fire me, I could have told you exactly who I was and watched you destroy your own career. But I didn't. Because the mission mattered more than my ego. Try to learn from that. She left him standing there and moved toward the trauma bays where Tom Chen and the other residents were doing final equipment checks. They all stopped and turned when she entered, their expressions mixing awe and apprehension. Chief Cross, Tom said. We just wanted to say— Save it, Evelyn interrupted, but her voice wasn't unkind. I need you focused on the next 3 hours, not on apologizing for the past 6 months. You've all read the protocols. You all understand the treatment sequences. When the casualties start arriving, I need you functioning like the physicians you're trained to be, not like people paralyzed by guilt. Can you do that? A chorus of affirmatives answered her. Good. Because people are going to die tonight if we're not perfect, and I don't accept anything less than perfect. She pulled up the treatment protocols on the trauma bay's main display. Let's review the critical decision points one more time. Because Sarah Chen is brilliant and angry, and she's designed these compounds to kill efficiently. Our job is to be more brilliant, more determined, and more committed to saving lives than she is to taking them. As she walked the team through the protocols, explaining complex chemistry in terms they could understand and apply, Evelyn felt the familiar focus of combat medicine settling over her. This was what she'd trained for. This was who she was beneath the quiet exterior and the deliberate invisibility. This was the moment when 6 months of being underestimated would become the foundation of victory. And in the clock tower across the city, Sarah Chen was setting up camera equipment and checking her timing mechanisms, confident that in a few short hours she would prove definitively that Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross was not as brilliant as her reputation suggested. She had no idea that the woman she'd been studying for months had been studying her right back, learning her patterns, anticipating her chemistry, and preparing a response that would turn Chen's own weapons against her in ways she couldn't possibly have predicted. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Riverside Falls was about to witness the final confrontation between two brilliant minds, one fighting for recognition, the other fighting for lives. Only one of them would walk away victorious, and only one of them understood that victory was measured not in proving superiority, but in the number of people who would see tomorrow's sunrise. The clock tower stood silent against the pre-dawn sky, its scaffolding casting geometric shadows across empty streets. Sarah Chen moved with practiced efficiency among camera equipment and laptop screens, positioning each device to capture different angles of the 6 target locations spread across Riverside Falls. Her hands were steady as she checked timing mechanisms on the remote detonators. 3 hours until simultaneous activation. 3 hours until the world witnessed Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross failed to save the people she'd spent 6 months protecting. Chen pulled up surveillance feeds on her laptop, watching federal agents positioning resources with what they thought was subtlety. They'd found her lab at Peterson Hall. She'd known they would, had counted on it, actually. The misdirection had been elegant, leading them to believe they understood her plan while she prepared something far more sophisticated. The 6 target locations in her notes were decoys. The real attacks would hit 3 different sites, places where Evelyn Cross had no personal connection, places federal resources weren't positioned to defend. A smile touched Chen's lips as she programmed the final timing sequences. Superior intelligence always defeated mere competence, and tonight would prove that definitively. What Chen didn't know was that Evelyn had anticipated the double blind, had understood that someone brilliant enough to design hybrid chemical weapons would also be brilliant enough to plant false intelligence. While Chen watched federal agents stage near the decoy locations, Evelyn was coordinating a different kind of preparation entirely. At Mercy Ridge General, Evelyn stood in the hospital's central security office, watching the same surveillance feeds Chen was monitoring. But Evelyn's screens showed additional data, thermal imaging, chemical sensors positioned throughout the city, and most critically, a real-time tracking algorithm Hayes had deployed that was analyzing Chen's laptop's network signature. She's using wireless detonators, Evelyn said quietly into her encrypted comm link, which means she needs network connectivity to trigger the devices. Hayes, are you isolating her signal? Working on it, Hayes responded. But Chief, she's routing through multiple VPNs and proxy servers. Even if we locate her transmission source, she can trigger manually as a backup. She won't trigger manually. That would require her to be close enough to the devices to risk exposure, and Chen doesn't take personal risks. She watches from safety, documents her success, then disappears. Evelyn pulled up architectural data for the clock tower. How many agents do you have staged near the courthouse? 6 in civilian vehicles, 2 sniper teams on adjacent rooftops. Once we confirm she's in position, we can take her into custody within 90 seconds. Make it 60 seconds. She's paranoid and intelligent. She'll have escape routes planned. I want overwhelming force the moment we move. Evelyn checked the time. 2 hours and 43 minutes until Chen's planned activation. And Hayes? When we take her down, I want it public. News cameras, witnesses, documentation. She wanted an audience for my failure. She's going to get an audience for hers. Tom Chen appeared at the security office door, his face tense. Chief, we've got a problem. One of the chemical exposure patients from earlier, Marcus Webb, he's showing delayed symptoms. Cardiac arrhythmia, respiratory distress. It's like he's having a secondary exposure reaction. Evelyn felt ice crystallize in her chest. She'd accounted for delayed toxicity, had built it into her protocols, but if Webb was declining this rapidly, it meant Chen's compounds were more sophisticated than the analysis had shown. Get him into Trauma 1 immediately. Full monitoring suite. I'll be there in 90 seconds. She turned back to Hayes. The devices Chen actually plans to deploy, they're going to be worse than what we've seen. She's been refining her formulas all night, learning from each deployment. Whatever she's built for the final attack, it's her masterpiece. Then how do we stop it if we don't know where the real targets are? We don't stop it. We let her deploy, we track the chemical signatures in real time, and we respond so fast and so effectively that we save everyone, despite her best efforts. Evelyn's voice was cold with determination. And then we make sure she understands that brilliance without humanity is just sophisticated cruelty. She left the security office at a run, moving through hospital corridors that had become familiar over 6 months of invisible labor. Staff members pressed against walls to let her pass, their expressions mixing respect and residual shame. Everyone knew now who she really was. Everyone understood what they'd failed to see. In Trauma 1, Webb was on the table, monitors screaming warnings about irregular heart rhythm and dropping oxygen saturation. Kelso was at his side, hands moving with practiced competence but eyes showing the fear of someone who understood they were fighting chemistry beyond their experience. Report? Evelyn demanded, moving to the monitors. QT prolongation, ventricular ectopi, oxygen sat dropping despite maximum support, Kelso said rapidly. It's like the treatment is wearing off and the original exposure is reasserting. Not reasserting. This is a secondary compound that was dormant in his system until the primary treatment activated it. Evelyn was already calculating, running through the chemistry in her mind. Chen had built a weapon with multiple stages, each one triggered by attempting to treat the previous stage. Elegant, vicious, exactly what someone trying to prove superiority would design. She engineered a treatment-resistant cascade. The antidote for the primary exposure activates a secondary toxin that causes delayed cardiac failure. How do we counter it? Tom asked, his voice tight. With chemistry she doesn't know I developed. Evelyn pulled up a file on her tablet, research from her most recent classified assignment, protocols for compounds that existed only in theoretical chemistry papers. I need these 3 medications, mixed in exactly these proportions, administered as a continuous IV infusion over 15 minutes. The pharmacy won't have the 3rd compound in stock. We'll need to synthesize it from precursors. Chief, that could take hours. It'll take 12 minutes if you move fast enough and trust my chemistry. Evelyn locked eyes with Tom. I've done this synthesis in field conditions with mortar rounds falling. You can do it in a fully equipped hospital pharmacy. Now go. Tom ran. Kelso stayed, managing Webb's deteriorating vitals while Evelyn prepared the other components. Her hands moved with absolute precision, measuring compounds to the exact microgram, calculating dosages based on Webb's weight and metabolism and the severity of his exposure. He's not going to make it, Kelso said quietly, watching the monitors. Chief, his heart rhythm is degrading too fast, even if we get the medication ready. He's going to make it because I don't accept the alternative. Evelyn's voice was flat. Marcus Webb has a 3-year-old daughter who needs her father. He went into a contaminated zone to save strangers. He deserves better than dying because someone wanted to prove they were smarter than me. 11 minutes later, Tom returned with the synthesized compound, his hand shaking slightly from the pressure, but his work perfect. Evelyn combined it with the other medications, checked the mixture 3 times, then started the IV infusion. For 30 seconds, nothing changed. Webb's heart continued its irregular, failing rhythm. His oxygen saturation continued to drop. The monitors continued to scream warnings. Then the cardiac rhythm began to stabilize, slowly at first, then with increasing regularity. The oxygen saturation ticked upward, 79%, 82, 85. Webb's breathing eased, the desperate gasping replaced by more normal respiratory effort. "It's working," Kelso breathed. "Chief, it's actually working." "Of course it's working. The chemistry is sound." But Evelyn felt relief flood through her system, felt the tension she'd been carrying release fractionally. One life saved. 1 point proven against Chen's assumption that treatment would fail. Her comm crackled with Hayes's urgent voice. "Chief, we've got movement at the clock tower. Thermal imaging confirms a single individual setting up equipment. We're 90% certain it's Chen." "Hold position until I give the order to move," Evelyn responded. "I want her to think she's winning right up until the moment we take her down." She turned to Kelso. "Doctor, Webb's infusion needs to run for another 12 minutes. Then he'll need continuous cardiac monitoring for 6 hours minimum. Can you handle that?" "Absolutely." Kelso paused. "Chief, about earlier. About everything over the past 6 months. Later," Evelyn interrupted. "Right now I need you being the physician I know you're capable of being. The apologies and reckonings can wait until after we've saved lives." She left Trauma 1 and headed for the roof where a helicopter was waiting. The pre-dawn darkness was beginning to yield to the first hints of sunrise, and somewhere in that growing light, Sarah Chen was preparing to activate devices designed to kill dozens of people to prove a point about intellectual superiority. The helicopter lifted off, banking hard toward downtown Riverside Falls. Evelyn spent the flight reviewing chemical sensor data, watching for the telltale signatures that would indicate where Chen's real devices were positioned. The decoy locations showed nothing, but 3 other sites were registering faint chemical traces: the main public library, the Riverside Transit Station, and the Central Water Treatment Facility. "Hayes, redirect all medical resources to these 3 locations," Evelyn transmitted. "Library, Transit Station, Water Treatment. Those are the real targets. The 6 sites in her notes were misdirection." "How can you be sure?" "Because I would do the same thing if I were trying to prove I was smarter than my opposition." "Lead them to prepare for one attack while executing another entirely." Evelyn studied the chemical sensor readings more closely. "And Hayes? These compounds are different from anything she's deployed before. More sophisticated, more lethal. This is Chen's masterpiece. She's going to try to create mass casualties we can't possibly save to prove her superiority definitively." The helicopter touched down on a building 2 blocks from the clock tower. Evelyn exited and moved to a tactical command post Hayes had established, where multiple screens showed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the city. And there, centered in one screen, was Sarah Chen herself, visible through the clock tower's broken windows as she made final adjustments to her equipment. She looked ordinary, just a woman in dark clothing, her expression focused and calm as she prepared to kill strangers to satisfy her ego. No visible signs of the brilliance or the instability, just deliberate competence applied to monstrous purpose. "I want to talk to her," Evelyn said suddenly. Hayes looked at her sharply. "Chief, that's not—" "I want her to understand exactly who beat her and how thoroughly she lost. Patch me through to her laptop. She'll be monitoring communications, waiting to see our response when her devices activate. Let's give her something to think about before that happens." Hayes hesitated, then nodded to a communications specialist. 30 seconds later, Evelyn's face appeared on every screen Chen was monitoring, interrupting her surveillance feeds with an image that made Chen freeze in visible shock. "Hello, Dr. Chen," Evelyn said calmly, her voice transmitting directly to Chen's equipment. "I wanted to introduce myself properly before you activate your devices. I'm Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross, and I've spent the past 12 hours studying your work. It's impressive, genuinely impressive. The hybrid compounds, the treatment-resistant cascades, the elegance of your synthesis. You're a brilliant chemist." In the clock tower, Chen's hands hovered over her keyboard, her expression cycling through surprise, suspicion, and the beginnings of satisfaction at having her brilliance acknowledged. "But here's what you don't understand," Evelyn continued. "Brilliance without purpose is just masturbation. You've spent months designing weapons to prove you're smarter than me, to demonstrate that your chemistry can overcome my protocols. And you're right, your compounds are sophisticated enough that my published protocols wouldn't save everyone, but that was never the real contest. Chen's satisfaction was fading, replaced by growing unease. The real contest was whether I could adapt faster than you could innovate, whether I could learn your methodology well enough to predict your next move before you made it. And Dr. Chen, I've been inside your head all night. I found your lab, I analyzed your notes, I understand how you think, how you modify compounds, what chemical signatures you favor, and I've developed counter protocols for compounds you haven't even synthesized yet. Evelyn pulled up a molecular diagram on the screen, a complex chemical structure that made Chen's eyes widen with recognition. It was the exact formula for her final devices, down to the last molecular bond. This is what you built for the library, the transit station, and the water treatment facility, Evelyn said. The 3 real targets you prepared while leading us to 6 decoys. It's elegant work, a quaternary compound that attacks 4 different physiological systems simultaneously, designed to overwhelm any single treatment approach. Someone less experienced might look at this and think it was unbeatable. Chen was standing now, staring at her screen, her face pale with the realization that her careful planning had been completely penetrated. But I'm not less experienced. I've been countering chemical weapons since before you finished your dissertation, and I've already synthesized the antidote. Evelyn pulled up another molecular diagram, a compound specifically designed to address each component of Chen's quaternary agent. It's beautiful chemistry, honestly. Probably the most sophisticated counteragent formula I've ever developed. I'm actually grateful to you for pushing me to design it. You're bluffing. Chen's voice finally came through the audio feed, tight with barely controlled fury. There's no way you could synthesize a counteragent that fast, not for a compound this complex. You're right that it was challenging, but Dr. Chen, I've been synthesizing counteragents in combat zones with limited equipment while people were actively trying to kill me. Your compounds are sophisticated, but you made them in a comfortable lab with all the time and resources you needed. I learned to work fast, to improvise, to make decisions with incomplete information because hesitation meant death. Evelyn's voice was calm, almost gentle. That's the difference between laboratory brilliance and combat effectiveness, and it's why you were always going to lose this contest. Chen's hands slammed down on her keyboard. Then I'll activate now, before you can position your resources, before you can distribute your so-called antidote. Let's see how brilliant you are when you're scrambling to respond. Go ahead, Evelyn said quietly. Activate your devices. We're ready. Chen's finger stabbed at the activation command. Across Riverside Falls, 3 devices began their release sequences. Chemical compounds dispersing into air handling systems, spreading through enclosed spaces where morning shift workers were just beginning their days. And simultaneously, medical teams deployed from positions Chen hadn't known existed, moving into the affected buildings with protective gear and carrying the counteragent Evelyn had already synthesized. Chemical sensors mapped the dispersal in real time. Decontamination protocols activated automatically. Within 90 seconds of Chen's activation, the response was coordinated, overwhelming, and devastatingly effective. Chen watched her surveillance feeds in growing horror as what should have been chaos became controlled crisis management, as what should have been mass casualties became organized evacuation and treatment. As her masterpiece attack was systematically dismantled by protocols and preparations she hadn't known existed. "No," she whispered. "No, this isn't. You can't." "We already have," Evelyn said. "Your device is activated, your compounds dispersed, and we're saving every single person you tried to kill because I spent tonight being better at adaptation than you are at innovation." She paused. "Federal agents are moving to your position now, Dr. Chen. You have approximately 30 seconds before they breach the clock tower. I wanted you to understand before they take you into custody exactly how completely you lost." Chen spun toward the clock tower's exit, but tactical teams were already ascending the stairs, their boots echoing in the enclosed space. She ran for a window, looking for the escape route she'd planned, but snipers on adjacent rooftops had clear line of sight. Every path was blocked, every contingency had been anticipated. She turned back to her laptop, to the screen showing Evelyn's calm face. "You think you've won? You think stopping these attacks means anything? I proved my point. My chemistry was better than yours. No, Dr. Chen, your chemistry was sophisticated, but mine saved lives while yours took them. That's not a difference in quality, it's a difference in purpose. Evelyn's voice was cold now. You wanted to prove you were superior. You wanted recognition for your brilliance, but you were so focused on being acknowledged that you forgot brilliance is only valuable when it serves something beyond ego. Federal agents burst through the clock tower door, weapons drawn, moving with practiced precision. Chen raised her hands slowly, her expression shifting from fury to something that looked almost like confusion as she was taken into custody. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible through the audio feed. Why did you bother? Why work so hard to save people who didn't even know who you were? Evelyn looked at her steadily through the camera. Because being seen was never the point. The work was the point. The lives were the point. And unlike you, I never needed anyone to acknowledge how brilliant I was, to know that what I was doing mattered. The feed cut off as agents removed Chen from the clock tower, and Evelyn turned away from the screens to watch the sunrise spreading across Riverside Falls. 3 attack sites, dozens of exposures, all being treated according to her protocols. Early reports were already coming in, casualties minimal, most victims showing rapid response to treatment, no fatalities expected. Sarah Chen's masterpiece had failed completely. Hayes appeared at Evelyn's shoulder. Chief, preliminary casualty reports are better than we dared hope. 37 total exposures across the 3 sites, all responding to treatment. We might actually get through this with 0 fatalities. Might isn't good enough. I want continuous monitoring for 72 hours minimum. Chen engineered delayed secondary effects into her previous compounds. We need to assume she did the same with these. Evelyn was already pulling up treatment protocols, checking for potential complications. And I want every exposure victim transferred to Mercy Ridge. They have the resources and the staff trained on my protocols. Already coordinating the transfers. Hayes paused. Chief, what you did tonight, the way you outmaneuvered Chen at every turn, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. You've never seen someone willing to be underestimated as a tactical advantage. Evelyn's voice was quiet. Chen spent months studying my published work, thinking she understood how I operate. But she never understood that the quiet competence, the willingness to absorb disrespect, the patience to wait for the moment that mattered, that was all part of who I am. She saw weakness where there was discipline. She saw submission where there was strategy. And the helicopter ride back to Mercy Ridge took 12 minutes. Evelyn spent it reviewing patient status updates, confirming treatment sequences, preparing for the final phase of the crisis. By the time they landed on the hospital roof, the first victims were already arriving by ambulance. The emergency department had transformed. Every available physician was present, every trauma bay was prepared, and in the center of it all was Dr. Adrian Kelso, directing staff with an authority that came from finally understanding the true stakes of emergency medicine. He looked up as Evelyn entered, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition that the past 6 months had led to this moment, and that the humiliation she'd endured had been building towards something that made all of it worthwhile. Chief Cross, Kelso said formally, we're ready to receive patients. All staff have been briefed on your protocols. We won't fail them. No, Evelyn agreed. We won't. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of organized intensity. Patients arrived in waves, each one showing different exposure levels, different symptom profiles, different complications. But each one received treatment according to protocols that Evelyn had designed specifically for Chen's compounds. And each one responded. Tom Chen coordinated the residents with newfound confidence. Jennifer Moss managed nursing staff with an efficiency that came from finally understanding what real competence looked like. And Kelso moved between trauma bays, following Evelyn's instructions with mechanical precision, learning to trust expertise that came from sources he'd never bothered to recognize. By early afternoon, all 37 victims were stable. No fatalities, no permanent injuries. Every single person Sarah Chen had tried to kill was going to survive to tell the story of the night Riverside Falls came under chemical attack and lived because one woman had been brilliant enough to stay 3 steps ahead of a terrorist who thought she was unbeatable. The hospital's conference room was packed with federal officials, hospital administrators, and news media when Evelyn finally agreed to answer questions. She'd changed into clean fatigues, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her face showing the exhaustion of 18 hours without sleep, but her eyes still sharp and focused. Patricia Rourke, the hospital administrator who'd overseen Evelyn's suspension 12 hours earlier, stood at the podium with an expression that mixed shame and desperate damage control. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Cross, who has been serving at Mercy Ridge General for the past 6 months as part of a federal security assessment. Chief Cross coordinated the emergency response to last night's chemical attacks and is directly responsible for the fact that we are reporting 0 fatalities from an incident that could have killed dozens. The room erupted with questions. Evelyn raised one hand for silence and got it immediately. "I'll make a brief statement, then take a few questions," she said. Last night, Riverside Falls was targeted by a sophisticated chemical weapons attack designed specifically to overwhelm emergency response capabilities. The person responsible is now in federal custody. Thanks to the coordinated efforts of federal agencies, local emergency services, and the medical staff at this hospital and others across the city, every single victim of these attacks is expected to make a full recovery. A reporter's hand shot up. "Chief Cross, can you address the reports that you were actually working here undercover, that the hospital staff didn't know who you really were?" Evelyn's expression remained neutral. "My assignment at Mercy Ridge General was part of a broader security assessment program. The details of that program remain classified. What I can tell you is that I spent 6 months working as a nurse in this hospital's emergency department, and that experience gave me valuable insight into civilian medical infrastructure and capabilities." "But you were suspended just hours before the attacks began," another reporter pressed. "Can you explain that?" Patricia Rourke started to interrupt, but Evelyn spoke first. "I was suspended for performing a medical procedure that saved a patient's life, but violated standard protocol hierarchy. That suspension was lifted once my actual credentials and the nature of my assignment became clear. The incident highlights important questions about how we value expertise, how we recognize competence, and how hierarchical structures in medicine can sometimes interfere with optimal patient care." Kelso, standing at the back of the room, felt those words like physical blows. Every person in that room knew what she was really saying, that she'd been suspended for being right when someone with more authority was wrong, that 6 months of disrespect had been based entirely on assumptions about who deserved recognition and who could be dismissed. Another reporter asked, "Chief Cross, what happens now? Will you continue working at Mercy Ridge?" "No," Evelyn said quietly. "My assignment here is complete. I'll be returning to active duty with Naval Medical Command." She paused, and for the first time, something that might have been emotion flickered across her face. "But I want to say something about the staff at this hospital. Over the past 18 hours, I've watched physicians and nurses respond to an unprecedented crisis with skill, dedication, and absolute commitment to saving lives. They followed complex protocols under extreme pressure. They adapted to evolving situations. They worked together as a team when it mattered most. That's what emergency medicine is supposed to be, and they should be proud of what they accomplished." It was generous. More generous than they deserved, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was also strategic. Evelyn was closing the door on this chapter of her life without burning bridges, without letting bitterness define her legacy at Mercy Ridge. The press conference concluded 20 minutes later. As the room cleared, Kelso approached Evelyn where she stood reviewing patient charts one final time. "Chief Cross, I want to—" "Don't," Evelyn interrupted. "I know what you're going to say. That you're sorry, that you didn't know, that if you'd understood who I was, you would have treated me differently." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but clear. "But that's exactly the problem, Doctor. You should have treated me with professional respect regardless of who I was. Competence deserves recognition whether it comes from a decorated combat medic or a new graduate nurse. The fact that you only see that now, after my credentials were revealed, means you haven't actually learned the lesson." "Then what do I do?" Kelso asked quietly. "How do I make this right?" "You treat the next person who shows competence with respect, even if they're low in the hierarchy. You listen when someone raises a legitimate concern, even if it challenges your authority. You judge people by their work, not by your assumptions about who they should be. Evelyn closed the chart. And you remember that the quiet person you barely notice might be the one who saves your life someday. Visibility isn't the same as value. She walked past him without waiting for a response, heading toward the locker room where her personal belongings had been stored for 6 months. The space was empty at this hour, and she allowed herself a moment of stillness as she opened her locker for the last time. Inside was the backpack she'd carried every day, the book she'd been reading, the photo she'd kept hidden, Marcus Webb's daughter, smiling at the camera, reminding Evelyn why the work mattered more than recognition. "Chief Cross," a quiet voice from the doorway. Tom Chen stood there, looking uncertain. "I wanted to thank you for everything you taught us tonight, for being patient with us even when we didn't deserve it. You're a good physician, Tom. You've got solid instincts and you're willing to learn. That's more than a lot of people can say." Evelyn shouldered her backpack. "Keep developing those instincts. Don't let hierarchy make you doubt yourself when you know something's wrong. And remember that the best medicine happens when people work together, not when they compete for recognition." "I will." Tom hesitated. "Where are you going? After you leave here?" "Wherever the Navy sends me. Wherever the expertise is needed." Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact. "There's always another crisis, another situation where lives depend on someone knowing the right chemistry at the right time. That's what I do. That's who I am." She walked out of Mercy Ridge General Hospital through the emergency department, past the trauma bays where lives had been saved, past the staff who finally understood who she'd been all along. News cameras caught footage of her departure, not dramatic, not ceremony-laden, just a woman in military fatigues walking purposefully toward a waiting federal vehicle. But that footage would be analyzed, discussed, shared across social media and news networks for weeks. The quiet nurse who'd been invisible for 6 months. The combat medic who'd single-handedly prevented a mass casualty event. The woman who'd proven that real power didn't require visibility, didn't demand recognition, didn't need anyone's permission to change the world. Sarah Chen's arrest made headlines, but it was Evelyn's story that captured public imagination. Within 48 hours, opinion pieces were running in major newspapers about hierarchical structures in healthcare, about how expertise gets overlooked when it doesn't fit expected patterns, about the danger of confusing authority with competence. The hospital board convened an emergency review of the suspension incident. Patricia Rourke resigned under pressure. New protocols were implemented requiring that concerns raised by any medical staff member be formally documented and reviewed, regardless of the staff member's position in the hierarchy. And Dr. Adrian Kelso stood before that board and delivered exactly the explanation Evelyn had demanded, a clear, unflinching account of how he'd spent 6 months dismissing expertise he was too arrogant to recognize. He didn't resign, but his authority was permanently diminished, his reputation marked by the understanding that brilliance without humility was just sophisticated foolishness. 3 weeks later, Evelyn stood in a Pentagon briefing room delivering a classified presentation to senior military leadership about the chemical weapons incident in Riverside Falls. Her analysis was comprehensive, her recommendations precise, her conclusions backed by data that only someone who'd lived through the crisis could provide. "The key finding," she said, "is that sophisticated chemical weapons can be developed and deployed by individuals with advanced chemistry knowledge and access to basic laboratory equipment. Traditional security approaches focused on controlling finished weapons or large-scale production facilities are inadequate. We need enhanced monitoring of precursor chemicals, better integration between civilian and military medical response systems, and continued development of adaptive counter protocols that can respond to novel threats." A general in the front row raised his hand. "Chief Cross, your response in Riverside Falls was extraordinary, but it relied heavily on your specific expertise and your ability to adapt in real time. How do we scale that capability? How do we prepare for chemical attacks when you're not available to coordinate the response?" "You train people to think like I think, not just to follow protocols I've written," Evelyn responded. "You teach adaptive chemistry, not just memorized counteragents. You emphasize understanding mechanisms of action so responders can design treatments for compounds they've never encountered. And most importantly, you create systems where expertise is recognized and valued, regardless of where it comes from in the hierarchy." The general nodded slowly. Speaking of which, there's been discussion about your next assignment. How would you feel about leading the development of a new training program? Teaching military and civilian medical personnel advanced chemical defense techniques? Evelyn considered the offer carefully. Teaching would mean passing on knowledge, would mean multiplying her impact beyond what she could accomplish alone, but it would also mean less field work, less direct response to crises, less of the sharp-edged satisfaction that came from saving lives with her own hands. I'd want to maintain active response capability, she said finally. Teaching is valuable, but I need to stay current with real-world applications. Theory without practice becomes obsolete. We can arrange that. You'd lead the training program development, but maintain a crisis response role for significant incidents. The general smiled slightly. Though after Riverside Falls, we'll probably be more careful about where we deploy you undercover. The news coverage made you somewhat recognizable. Recognition was never the goal, sir. Effectiveness was the goal. Recognition is just a side effect. Evelyn's voice was calm, but I appreciate that the Navy understands the difference. The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations that Evelyn accepted with the same quiet competence she'd shown scrubbing floors at Mercy Ridge. Visibility had its uses, but it didn't change who she was or why the work mattered. That evening, she visited Marcus Webb at his home in suburban Riverside Falls. He answered the door looking healthy, recovered, alive because Evelyn had refused to accept secondary toxicity as inevitable. His 3-year-old daughter clung to his leg, curious about the visitor. Chief Cross, Webb said, genuine warmth in his voice. Please come in. I wanted to thank you properly for everything you did. I'm told I wouldn't be here without your counter-protocol for the delayed cardiac effects. You're here because you had the courage to stay with patients when your suit failed, Evelyn corrected. I just made sure that courage didn't cost you your life. She knelt down to the daughter's eye level. Your dad's a hero, sweetheart. You should be very proud of him. The girl nodded solemnly, not really understanding but sensing the importance of the moment. What will you do now? Webb asked. I heard you left Mercy Ridge. New assignment. Training program development for advanced chemical defense. Teaching others to respond to situations like Riverside Falls. Evelyn stood. But I wanted to check on you first. Make sure the recovery was complete. It is, thanks to you. Webb paused. Chief, there's something I've been wondering. Why did you spend 6 months working as a regular nurse when you could have revealed who you really were at any time? You had to know people weren't treating you with the respect you'd earned. Evelyn smiled slightly. Because respect you have to demand isn't worth having. Real respect is earned through work, through competence, through showing up day after day and doing what matters whether anyone's watching or not. The people at Mercy Ridge who treated me poorly weren't disrespecting my credentials. They were revealing who they actually were beneath the professional facade. She moved toward the door. And when the crisis came, when it really mattered, the truth became visible without me having to say a word. That's more satisfying than forcing recognition ever could be. She left Webb's house and drove through Riverside Falls as evening settled over the city, past the convention center where the first attack had occurred, past the Commerce Tower parking structure, past City Hall. Each location had been restored, cleaned, made safe again. Life continued because one woman had been willing to be invisible until visibility served a purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from Hayes. Final report complete. Chen charged with terrorism, attempted murder, use of weapons of mass destruction. DOJ is pursuing maximum penalties. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison. Evelyn read the message without satisfaction or triumph. Sarah Chen had been brilliant and angry and had channeled both qualities into destruction. The fact that she'd failed, that her masterpiece had been dismantled by superior strategy and adaptive chemistry, was justice, but not victory. Victory would have been Chen choosing to use her brilliance for construction instead of destruction. But not everyone made that choice. Some people needed recognition more than they needed purpose. Some people measured success by dominance rather than contribution. And some people had to learn the hard way that being the smartest person in the room meant nothing if you were using that intelligence to harm rather than heal. Evelyn's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the preview text. This is Tom Chen from Mercy Ridge. I wanted you to know something. She opened the full message. Dr. Kelso has completely changed how he runs the ER. He listens to nurses now. He asks questions instead of assuming he knows everything. Yesterday, a nurse caught something he'd missed and he thanked her publicly. It's not everything, but it's something. I thought you'd want to know that what you did here, it changed more than just that one night. It changed how we think about expertise and respect and what really matters in medicine. Thank you for that. Thank you for showing us who we should have been all along. Evelyn read the message twice, then typed a brief response. Keep being willing to learn. Keep valuing competence over hierarchy. Keep remembering that the best medicine happens when people work together instead of competing for recognition. You're going to be an excellent physician. She put the phone away and continued driving, heading toward the highway that would take her back to the naval base, back to her next assignment, back to the work that mattered more than recognition. The sunset painted Riverside Falls in shades of gold and orange, and somewhere in that light, Evelyn Cross, the woman who'd been invisible for 6 months, who'd absorbed contempt and converted it into tactical advantage, who'd proven that real power came from competence rather than visibility, allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not because she'd been recognized, not because people finally knew who she was, but because 37 people who should have died were having dinner with their families. Because Marcus Webb's daughter still had her father. Because a hospital had learned to value expertise regardless of where it originated. Because Sarah Chen's attempt to prove superiority through destruction had been answered with competence channeled toward preservation. The work had mattered, the lives had mattered, and Evelyn had never needed anyone to acknowledge how brilliant she was to know that what she'd done made a difference. That knowledge was enough. It had always been enough, and it would continue to be enough wherever the next crisis took her, whatever challenges waited in the future. However many times she'd have to prove that quiet competence was more powerful than visible arrogance. She merged onto the highway as full darkness fell, leaving Riverside Falls behind, but carrying forward the understanding that she'd changed more than just one city's emergency response protocols. She demonstrated a truth that would ripple outward through news coverage and policy changes and training programs, that true strength didn't require recognition, that real expertise didn't demand visibility, and that the people who changed the world were often the ones working quietly in the background until the moment their skills became absolutely critical. The quiet ones. The patient ones. The ones willing to be underestimated until underestimation became the enemy's fatal mistake. Evelyn Cross had never been invisible. She'd just been waiting for the moment when being seen actually mattered. And when that moment came, she'd proven beyond any doubt that competence, dedication, and the discipline to serve something larger than ego were infinitely more powerful than any weapon chemistry could create. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, and Evelyn drove forward without hesitation, ready for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she'd never need anyone's permission to be exactly who she'd always been. A warrior, a healer, and proof that the most dangerous opponents were the ones you'd been trained to overlook.